Our new house was finally finished, and I was so excited that our new life was about to begin. But then my in-laws suddenly showed up. "We're going to live here now, so you need to move your parents out," they said. I was shocked and didn't understand what was happening, so I turned to my husband for help. He sighed and said, "This is how it is. You need to tell your mom and dad." Then my in-laws started moving their things into our house, excited to see the place. I coldly asked, "Do you know whose house this is?" "My name is Sarah, and I'm 35 years old. I work in an office, and my husband, Jack, and I have been married for 3 years. We don't have kids yet, but we're happy together. But lately, I've been worried about my parents because they're getting older and their health is getting worse. So I decided to talk to Jack about the possibility of living with them." Jack said, "I don't mind living with your parents. It will be good for both of you." "Thank you, Jack. I'm so glad I married such a kind person." We planned to move in with my parents, but there was a problem. My parents lived far from the city, and it would be hard for both of us to work from there. Plus, our apartment was too small for 4 adults, and we didn't even have space for a baby if we had one. I came up with an idea. "What if we build a new house?" Jack's face lit up. "I like that idea. Let's build a house where everyone can live comfortably." He agreed, and we quickly started planning to build a new home. When I told my parents, they felt bad at first, but when I explained we were thinking about the future, like when we have kids, they understood. It made me happy to see them supportive. Jack and I met with a real estate agent to discuss the details. We wanted to find a place close to a hospital for my parents and near a train station for us. We thought about how many floors the house should have and how big it should be. I asked my parents for their opinions, but they were just happy to live with us and left it to me. Jack, however, had many ideas and was very involved, which helped a lot. Every time we agreed on something, I got more excited, knowing we were getting closer to our dream house. After a lot of planning and research, we finally hired a contractor and were ready to start building. Building the house was a lot of work, and because we were both working, it took a long time. We were exhausted, but happy. The house layout was exactly what we wanted, and it felt like a big achievement after all the effort. But even though it was taking a while, we were still excited and looked forward to the day it was finished. Then my in-laws found out we were building a house, and they started calling me all the time. "Sarah, we're coming to visit. I heard you're building a house." "Yes, that's right. It should be ready by the end of the year." "That's wonderful. Tom is doing great. Why don't you come by sometime and we can talk more?" My husband and I went to visit them for the weekend. When we got there, they greeted us with big smiles. "Congratulations on your new house. Isn't it exciting to build a home?" my father-in-law said, smiling as if it was his own. "Yes, I'm really looking forward to it. I want everything to be perfect, but I also want to move in as soon as possible. It's been a busy time," I replied. We talked excitedly about the house. "Oh, I want to see the floor plan," my mother-in-law said. Jack showed her the pictures on his phone. "Wow, this house is huge. There's plenty of room for everyone," she said. "Yeah, we're planning to live with my parents, so we need this much space." "Living with your parents?" My in-laws looked at Jack, surprised. "You're moving in with Sarah's parents?" "Yes, that's right. Sarah's parents have been having trouble with their legs and hips lately, so we decided to move in with them. That's why we bought a new house." "I see. Well, good luck then." I could tell that my mother-in-law and father-in-law's tone had changed. I started to understand why they weren't happy about this. They probably didn't like the idea of my parents living with us instead of them. So I decided to change the subject. "How are you guys doing? Are you feeling okay?" "We're fine. Nothing has really changed." "Yeah, just the same old routine." "All right then. Let's talk about the new house. Do you know which room your parents will take?" "Oh, we're thinking about this room." My husband didn't seem to notice that his parents were upset, but I could tell that they weren't too happy about my parents moving in with us. They didn't like that my parents were a priority over them. I felt a little bad for them, but since we were building the house with my parents in mind, I thought they should understand. But it seemed like my in-laws didn't see it that way. The house was coming along nicely. Every time I visited, it looked more like our dream home. I was excited, but I also wanted to make sure everything was done properly. I went to see the house with my parents, and they were so happy to see it. I was glad I could do something special for them. But there was something bothering me. My husband had been visiting his parents more often, especially on weekends. Are you visiting your parents again this weekend? Yes. You've been going a lot lately. I need to take care of them. That's why I'm visiting them on my days off. That's so thoughtful of you. Do you want me to come with you? I was worried that my in-laws might be upset. I knew they would be sad that they weren't living with us. So I thought I could help out and show them kindness too. But my husband said, no, it's fine. I'm okay, and went by himself. I was okay with that, but let him know that I'd be there if he needed me. The house was finally done. When the moving day arrived, my husband and I were so excited. We packed up our things and headed to our new house with big smiles on our faces. When we arrived at our new home, I was so excited to finally see it. The house was stunning, and I couldn't help but say wow as I looked at it. I was imagining a life where I'd be cooking while my husband and kids played in the yard and we'd have barbecues together. It felt like the start of a new chapter. My parents were still stuck in traffic, so I decided to wait for them and let my husband know what was happening. But then, unexpectedly, my in-laws showed up. I was shocked and wondered, why are they here? They got out of the car, smiling, and said, we're here. What an amazing house. This is something you can brag about. Isn't it wonderful? Sarah has great taste, my father-in-law said. Yes, I agree, I replied, still confused by their sudden appearance. Then, to my surprise, they started unloading luggage from their car. I rushed over to them. What are you doing? Why are you unloading that? They said, we're moving in today. You need to get rid of your parents. I was completely confused. What are you talking about? My mother-in-law sighed and explained. Normally, a wife is supposed to take care of her husband's parents, so we should live here. What? No. Go call your parents. We're busy moving, I said, frustrated. I didn't understand, so I turned to my husband for help, but he just sighed and said, that's how it is. You need to talk to your mom and dad. I was shocked. This house was built for my parents to live with us. I can't let you do this, I said, my voice shaky with emotion. He got upset with me. You heard my mom. A wife is supposed to serve her husband's family. Well, think about your parents later. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It felt like my husband had been influenced by his parents, or maybe he always thought this way. You two need to take your stuff out of here, I snapped. My mother-in-law and father-in-law ignored me and started going through the house as if it were theirs. They were admiring the place with big smiles, and I said coldly, do you know whose house this is? My mother-in-law looked at me and said, it's Jack's, of course. I couldn't hold back. Don't act like this is your home just because Jack is supporting you and built it for you, I said firmly. They were upset, not even letting me explain myself. It seemed like my husband hadn't told them about our finances. Why did he even build this house if he's just going to let your parents move in? They said. I felt terrible for Jack, realizing how much pressure he was under from his family. I couldn't take it anymore. I was tired of being misunderstood. If you insist on living here, then I will have to ask Jack to return the money I paid for this house, I said firmly. My in-laws looked at me confused. How much did you pay for this house? Probably nothing, right? $100? They laughed. But my husband didn't say anything, his face going pale. I looked him straight in the eyes and said, are you proud of yourself, letting this go on without telling the truth? He seemed lost and asked, what are you talking about? My mother-in-law tried to explain. Jack didn't want to say anything, so I had to tell them. I looked at them both and said, I bought this house with all of my savings. If you want to live here, you'll need to pay me the $500,000 it cost. Their eyes widened in shock. They looked at my husband for confirmation. When my in-laws asked my husband if I really bought the house, he quietly confirmed it. Sarah bought the house. She's head of her department, and her salary is much higher than mine. His parents were shocked. But you've been with your company for so long. Yeah, but I've made a lot of mistakes at work. I'm not moving up, and now I'm even taking a pay cut. I make less than a new graduate, my husband confessed. Suddenly, my in-laws switched their tone completely. They started pleading with me. Sarah, we're sorry for everything we said earlier. We were wrong. Please forgive us and let us live here. I was furious. No, I bought this house to live with my parents. I won't allow you to take their place. If you want to live here, You'll have to pay me $500,000. They looked at each other and said, "We don't have that kind of money." "Then you'll need to leave," I said firmly. "But we sold our house." "If you kick us out, we have nowhere to go," they pleaded. "Rent an apartment then. I'm not letting you stay here. It's impossible for all of us to live under one roof," I said coldly. Then my in-laws began to cry. "We've made mistakes with our investments and are in debt. We sold our house and used our retirement savings to pay it off. We're too old now, and we have nowhere else to turn. We need you." I couldn't believe they were using this sob story. "If you need help, you need to go to your son. I'm not obligated to support strangers." "But we're your in-laws," they argued. "Why won't you help us?" "I'm sorry, but I can't stay married to someone who lets his parents try to take over the house like this. I'm divorcing Jack," I said. Jack panicked. "You can't divorce me," he pleaded. "I want you out of the house now," I replied, standing firm. When he realized I was serious, he started to panic even more. My in-laws tried to beg me again, but I threatened to call the police if they didn't leave. They quickly ran out. Jack stayed calm but sad. "I'm still your husband. I have the right to stay here. If you stay, I'll sue you and have you kicked out," I told him, and he quickly left with his belongings. If his workplace found out about the lawsuit, he would be fired, and he knew that. So he left in a hurry. When my parents arrived, they were shocked to find my husband gone. I explained what had happened, and they were grateful for my decision. They thanked me for standing up for them. It was a relief to have taken control of the situation. I felt glad I got rid of those selfish people before we had kids. After the divorce was finalized, I was living comfortably in our new house with my parents, free from all the drama. I never meant to build an empire. It started as a way to cope with loneliness when my husband Michael's 80-hour work weeks as a corporate lawyer left me alone in our too-big house in Boston's affluent Beacon Hill neighborhood. What began with handmade jewelry sold on Etsy transformed into something none of them saw coming, especially not my mother-in-law, Patricia Wellington, who never missed an opportunity to remind me that I was beneath her precious son. "Another craft fair, dear?" she would say at our monthly family dinners, her voice dripping with condescension. How quaint. If only she knew that my little craft business had just shipped its millionth order last week. If only my husband knew that while he was billing $800 an hour to make partner, I was building a brand that would soon be worth more than his entire law firm. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Emily Chen Wellington, and 5 years ago, I was just a graphic designer who fell in love with a lawyer from an old-money Boston family. The Wellingtons traced their lineage back to the Mayflower and never let anyone forget it. When Michael proposed, his mother took me aside and said, "At least you're Chinese. That's almost acceptable these days. Your children will be good at math." I should have run then. Instead, I smiled and endured like I had been taught, like my immigrant parents had done when they first came to America. Keep your head down, work hard, and success will follow. The idea for Lux Craft started during those lonely nights. I combined my graphic design skills with traditional Chinese craft techniques my grandmother had taught me, creating modern jewelry with an Asian fusion twist. My first piece, a delicate jade pendant wrapped in silver wire with a contemporary geometric design, sold within hours of listing it on Etsy. "That's nice, honey," Michael said when I told him, barely looking up from his case files. "But maybe focus on redecorating the house." "The partners are coming for dinner next month." I did focus on the house by converting our 3-car garage into a studio. While Michael climbed the corporate ladder and Patricia planned charity galas, I was building something revolutionary. My designs caught the attention of fashion bloggers, then magazines, then celebrities. Orders poured in faster than I could fulfill them. I hired other immigrant women from my mother's church to help with production. Many of them, like Mrs. Zhang and Mrs. Kim, had been engineers and artists in their home countries, but couldn't find work in America. Together, we created a production system that maintained handcrafted quality while scaling up operations. I took online business courses at night, learning about supply chains, marketing, and e-commerce. My little Etsy shop evolved into luxcraft.com. We expanded from jewelry to handbags, then to home decor. Each piece told a story, blending Eastern craftsmanship with Western design. Our waiting lists grew longer. Venture capitalists started calling. But at home, nothing changed. Michael was too busy to notice that I'd stopped using his credit cards. Patricia still introduced me at parties as Michael's wife who does crafts. My father-in-law, Judge Wellington, still called me the artist in that tone that made it sound like a mental condition. Then came the dinner that changed everything. Patricia had organized a special family gathering at her Beacon Hill mansion. All the Wellingtons would be there, including Michael's siblings with their properly employed spouses, doctors, lawyers, and investment bankers all. I arrived late because we had just closed a deal to supply our products to a major luxury department store chain. Michael was already there, deep in conversation with his brother about their latest cases. "Emily, darling, we were just talking about you," Patricia called out as I entered the formal dining room. 20 pairs of Wellington eyes turned to me. I knew that tone. It was the same one she used when discussing the help. "Patricia was telling us about your little online shop," Michael's sister-in-law Amanda said, adjusting her Hermes scarf. "How enterprising of you." I took my seat, noticing the subtle way Patricia had arranged the table, placing me at the far end, away from the important conversations. The catering staff served the first course. Imported caviar on mother-of-pearl spoons. My phone buzzed in my purse, but I ignored it. Another message from the Amazon acquisition team could wait. "You know," Patricia announced, tapping her crystal glass for attention, "I've been thinking about what's best for the Wellington name. Michael's making partner this year, finally entering the family tradition of real achievement." Michael beamed. I took a sip of wine. "Which is why," she continued, fixing me with her society smile, "we need to discuss Emily's hobby." The word hung in the air like a poisoned arrow. I felt my cheeks flush as Patricia launched into her carefully prepared speech. A Wellington spouse has certain obligations, certain standards to uphold. We're not ordinary people who need to sell trinkets online. Michael, darling, don't you think it's time Emily focused on more appropriate activities? The hospital board has an opening. My phone buzzed again, and again, and again. "Mother's right," Michael said, loosening his Hermes tie. "I make more than enough for both of us. This crafts thing, it's a bit embarrassing at this level of society." The buzzing wouldn't stop. As the Wellingtons nodded in collective agreement about my social failings, I finally pulled out my phone. 10 missed calls from my lawyer, 5 from my investment banker, and 1 message that would wipe those condescending smiles off every Wellington face. "URGENT, Amazon final offer, $80 million cash plus stock. Need answer tonight." I looked up from my phone to see Patricia frowning at my breach of dinner etiquette. If only she knew what was coming. As Patricia continued her lecture about appropriate activities for a Wellington spouse, I felt a strange calm settle over me. 5 years of condescension, of being treated like a charity case who got lucky enough to marry into their precious family, it was about to end. "Emily, are you even listening?" Patricia's sharp voice cut through my thoughts. "This is important. The Wellington name." "Will be just fine," I interrupted, standing up. Every head at the table turned. I had never interrupted Patricia before. In fact, I'd say it's about to become much more valuable. Michael frowned. "Emily, don't be dramatic. Mother's only trying to help." "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "I have an announcement of my own." I turned to face Patricia directly. "You're right. It's time to discuss my little hobby." I pulled up the email on my phone and began reading. "Dear Mrs. Chen Wellington, following our final evaluation, Amazon is pleased to present our best and final offer for the acquisition of Lux Craft Incorporated. $80 million in cash, plus $20 million in Amazon stock options, with a 3-year earnout potential of an additional $50 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael's fork clattered onto his $400 dinner plate. That's impossible," Patricia whispered, her face pale. "Your little online craft shop generated $42 million in revenue last year." I continued, warming to my task. "We have partnerships with Nordstrom, Bloomingdale's, and Neiman Marcus. Our waiting list for custom pieces is 6 months long." "Oh, and that charitable donation you were bragging about earlier, Patricia? The one where you gave $50,000 to the Asian American Arts Foundation. That was actually from me. I'm their largest anonymous donor." Judge Wellington's bushy eyebrows shot up. "You're saying your craft business is worth $100 million? "No," I smiled, checking my phone again. According to this new message, Google just countered Amazon's offer. Now it's worth $120 million. Michael stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. But I'm the breadwinner. I make 7 figures. And I make that in a month, I replied calmly. Those nights you thought I was playing with beads, I was building an empire. While you were billing hours, I created jobs for over 200 women, mostly immigrants who couldn't get proper jobs despite having advanced degrees. Amanda's Hermes scarf suddenly looked a bit tight around her neck. But you never said anything. Would you have believed me? I asked, looking around the table. Would any of you have taken me seriously? You were all so convinced that making partner at a law firm was the height of achievement. Patricia had recovered enough to attempt damage control. Well, this is wonderful news. I always said Emily had potential. No, I cut her off again. You always said I was embarrassing, that I was beneath your son, that my little hobby was a shame to the Wellington name. I turned to my husband. And you, Michael? When was the last time you asked me about my work? When was the last time you came to see what I was building in that garage you complained about me wasting? The room spun with tension as years of unspoken resentment finally found voice. But I wasn't finished. I pulled out one more piece of paper from my purse. Something I'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. There's one more thing, I said, sliding the document across the table to Michael. I've been so busy with the acquisition negotiations, I almost forgot to mention it. These came from my lawyer last week. Michael picked up the papers, his hands trembling slightly. His face went from red to white as he read the title. Petition for divorce. But why? He stammered. We can work this out, now that I know about the money. That's exactly why, I replied, gathering my things. 5 years, Michael. 5 years of dismissing me, belittling my work, treating me like a charity case. 5 years of watching your mother tear me down while you smiled and nodded. The money isn't why I'm leaving. It's just what finally gave me the courage to do it. I turned to address the entire stunned table. Oh, and Patricia, remember last month when you said the Wellingtons only wear real jewelry, not craft fair trinkets? That necklace you're wearing, the one you bragged about buying at Tiffany's, it's one of mine. Tiffany's is our biggest wholesale client. Patricia's hand flew to her throat, touching the $12,000 necklace she'd shown off all evening. I could practically see her mentally reviewing all the compliments she'd received on her exquisite taste. As I walked toward the door, Judge Wellington finally found his voice. Now see here, young lady, you can't just. Actually, I can, I said, pausing at the threshold. And one more thing, Michael, remember how you always insisted I sign a prenup to protect the Wellington family fortune? You might want to read Clause 7.3, the one about how all business assets developed during the marriage are considered joint property unless specifically excluded. Michael's face went from white to green. I smiled. Don't worry, I'm not interested in your law firm partnership, but I thought you should know, technically you own half of my company. Well, you did. I sold your shares to my employees last week for $1. They earned it. The explosion of voices behind me as I walked out was music to my ears. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of their education about underestimating the wrong person. The media explosion hit the next morning. Immigrant woman's craft business sells for $120 million, made headlines across every major business publication. My phone rang nonstop with journalists wanting to know how a simple crafter had built such an empire right under Boston society's nose. But the real drama was unfolding in the Wellington family group chat, which I hadn't yet been removed from. Patricia, she's ruined us. Everyone at the club is talking. Amanda, my friends are asking if I can introduce them to Emily for business advice. Michael, mother, please calm down. My colleagues are congratulating me on my entrepreneurial wife. Judge Wellington, some yuani explain how we messy DDS. I smiled, switching off my phone as I walked into Luxacraft's headquarters, a renovated textile mill in Cambridge that employed over 200 people, mostly immigrant women like my mother. Mrs. Zhang, my first hire and now chief operating officer, met me at the door. The acquisition team from Google is here, she said with a knowing smile, and you won't believe who else is in the lobby. I rounded the corner to find Patricia Wellington pacing nervously, clutching her Lux Craft necklace. She froze when she saw me. Emily dear, she began, her society smile strained. I've been doing some thinking about last night. Mrs. Wellington, I interrupted politely, you'll need to schedule an appointment with my assistant. I have a meeting with Google's executive team right now. But we're family, she protested. Are we? I raised an eyebrow. Last night you made it very clear that I wasn't Wellington material. Now, if you'll excuse me. I walked past her into our main conference room, where Google's top brass waited. Through the glass walls, I watched Patricia's face as she realized that the craft hobby she dismissed was being courted by tech giants. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Google's offer beat Amazon's, closing at $150 million with the earnout potential. The story went viral. Immigrant woman builds $1 million empire while her blue blood in-laws mock her hobby. Every major network wanted an interview. Michael's law firm colleagues started referring their wives to Lux Craft for trunk shows. The same society women who had snubbed me at Patricia's parties now called daily, hoping to invest in my next venture. But the sweetest moment came during the acquisition closing dinner. Google had rented out the same exclusive restaurant where the Wellingtons had once made me feel like an outsider. As I stood to give my speech, I saw Michael and his family slinking in through the side door. They'd obviously pulled strings to be there. 5 years ago, someone told me that craft fairs weren't appropriate for certain levels of society. That immigrant women should know their place. That success meant following traditional paths. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. But my mother taught me something different, she said. Success isn't about fitting into someone else's world, it's about building your own. I gestured to the immigrant women who now held executive positions at Luxcraft. Together, we didn't just build a company, we built a community. We proved that craft fairs can become empires, that hobbies can change lives, and that sometimes the people who dismiss you are the ones who end up watching you soar. The room erupted in applause. From the corner of my eye, I saw Patricia dab at tears, while Michael stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. After the dinner, Mrs. John approached me with news that made my victory complete. Our immigrant employment program had been selected for a prestigious innovation award. The presenter? The Wellington Foundation for Social Progress. Patricia's pet project. They'll have to give an award to the very people they look down on. Mrs. John laughed. Karma is real. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Michael tried everything to win me back, suddenly fascinated by my entrepreneurial spirit. But as I told the divorce court, some bridges can't be unburned. I bought a penthouse in Back Bay, right next door to Patricia's beloved social club. Every morning, I watch her society friends line up at the Luxcraft flagship store across the street, bragging about their personal connection to the founder. Last week, I received an invitation to speak at Michael's law firm's Women's Leadership Conference. The topic? Breaking Through. How to Succeed When Others Doubt You. I declined. I was too busy launching our new foundation, which provides seed funding to immigrant women entrepreneurs. The final twist of the knife came yesterday. Patricia's Country Club, the one that had taken decades for the Wellingtons to get into, invited me to join as an honorary member. I accepted with one condition, that they also offer membership to Mrs. John and our other immigrant executives. But that's not how things are done. The membership committee sputtered. Then perhaps it's time things changed, I replied. They agreed. This morning, I had coffee at the club, sitting at the best table, the one Patricia had always claimed as her territory. As I sipped my latte, I opened an email from a young immigrant woman who'd read about my story. You showed me that our dreams don't have to fit into someone else's box, that we can build our own tables when they won't give us a seat at theirs. Thank you for proving them wrong. I looked around the club, at the society women who now competed for my attention, at the old money that now eagerly sought new ideas. Patricia was there too, sitting in a corner, watching as her former social circle gravitated toward my table. She caught my eye and gave a small, defeated nod. Finally, she understood. The very things they had mocked, my heritage, my creativity, my little hobby, had become their obsession. I nodded back, then returned to my coffee. Success, after all, is the best revenge. But changing the game? That's priceless. My phone buzzed. Another interview request, this time from Forbes. They wanted to feature me in their Self-Made Women issue. The suggested title made me smile. The Craft Queen of Boston. How an immigrant's hobby disrupted high society and built a $150 million empire. Sometimes I thought the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about rising so high that they have to look up to see you. And sometimes the people who dismiss your dreams end up having to watch them come true, from a distance, through the windows of the empire they never believed you could build.
I received a frustrating WhatsApp message from my sister. I left your disabled daughter at your home. Panic-stricken, I rushed home, only to find my daughter sobbing uncontrollably, alone, outside the house. This was the breaking point. I couldn't rely on my sister to look after my kids anymore. It was time to show her what family truly meant. My name is Amanda. I'm 43 years old and have a passion for baking. Ever since I was a kid, I've loved experimenting in the kitchen. You'd think I'd be a master by now, right? And, well, not to brag, but I am, mostly. Except for chiffon cakes. My kids love to tease me about those. Mom, your chiffon cake's so dry. Don't worry, we'll help you next time. But when it comes to muffins, I'm a star. My kids' friends often gush, we wish you were our mom. My own kids just give me smug looks, as if to say, yep, that's our mom. These little moments of banter and joy make family life so special, or so I thought. But my sister Kathy's idea of family was vastly different. This story begins a few years ago, during spring vacation, when my family visited my parents' home. We were casually watching TV when Kathy blurted out, lately, there are so many kids with developmental disabilities. I wonder why. Her comment was as out of place as it was jarring. The TV wasn't even discussing disabilities. Everyone, including my mom and husband, turned to her, puzzled. What's with the sudden comment? I asked. A colleague's child was recently diagnosed with a developmental disability, she replied. Apparently, kids who are restless or struggle academically might fall into that category. I don't know much about it, but honestly, I think Sarah might have one too. I was stunned. Sarah is Kathy's daughter, my niece. She'd always seemed like a perfectly normal child to me. Why would you think that? I asked, trying to stay calm. Well, compared to Ken, she's not as smart. Her language skills are underdeveloped. It's like she has a poor memory or something, Kathy insisted. Mom, my husband, and I exchanged uneasy glances. None of us were experts on developmental disabilities, but nothing about Sarah had ever struck us as unusual. Kathy, however, seemed fixated. You just don't get it, Amanda, she said, frustrated. I've been researching developmental disabilities. I know what I'm talking about. At the time, we brushed it off, assuming Kathy would consult a doctor if she was truly concerned. But by the time summer rolled around, her tone had shifted alarmingly. I knew it. Sarah does have a developmental disability, Kathy declared during another family gathering. Her voice carried an unsettling note of triumph, as though she'd just solved a mystery. Did you take her to a doctor? Mom asked, concerned. No, I didn't need to. I have proof, Kathy said smugly. Proof? Mom frowned. Stop talking like she's some kind of criminal. But Kathy pressed on. Sarah starts elementary school next year, and she still can't write the alphabet. She's in kindergarten, that's perfectly normal, I said. Even my daughter, who's already in school, struggles with some letters. Well, that's because your daughter takes after you, Kathy shot back, a smug smile on her face. Her husband Tim chimed in. Maybe your daughter has a developmental disability too. Like mother, like daughter. Anger flared in me, but I held it back. Kids develop at their own pace. There's no need to rush, I said firmly. But Kathy wouldn't hear it. Ken could write the alphabet ages ago, she insisted, comparing Sarah to her older brother, who'd always been exceptionally bright. Ken is 3 years older, I pointed out. It's unfair to compare them. Tim scoffed. Well, from a medical perspective, Sarah clearly has a developmental disability. I stared at him, dumbfounded. Medical perspective? Tim, you're not a doctor. It was clear Kathy and Tim had convinced themselves that Sarah was deficient simply because she wasn't meeting the impossibly high standards they'd set for Ken. It wasn't just frustrating, it was heartbreaking. I always say my siblings graduated from a national university, so I'm smart. Tim's words still echoed in my mind. As ridiculous as they were, he often boasted about his intelligence, using his siblings' accomplishments as if they were his own. For the record, Tim himself graduated from a private university, and not even by choice. He had failed the National University Entrance Exam after ignoring his teacher's advice not to take it. Now, he manages a supermarket, yet insists he's just as brilliant as his siblings. If you're thinking, what is he even talking about? you're not alone. I later learned that Tim was something of an outcast within his own family, which perhaps explained his need to constantly prove himself. But his behavior didn't just stop at self-aggrandizement, it extended into how he and Kathy treated their daughter, Sarah. One day, my husband Mike cautiously suggested, maybe a professional should evaluate Sarah. It could help clear things up. "Oh, I've already consulted professionals," Kathy replied quickly. For a moment, silence fell, and a collective question mark seemed to hang in the air. "What do you mean by professionals?" Mike asked. "Well, I've watched health programs on TV," Kathy said matter-of-factly. Their observations matched Sarah's symptoms exactly, so it must be accurate. We all sighed in exasperation. Tim chimed in, backing Kathy up. "Yes, those specials are very informative. A colleague of mine saw one, took their child to the doctor, and the diagnosis matched perfectly. It's serious stuff." Mom finally had enough. "TV is just TV. Stop using it as your source for medical advice. If you're truly worried, take Sarah to a real doctor. Stay out of our parenting," Kathy snapped, her voice sharp. "You're all so ignorant." And with that, she stormed out, dragging Tim and Ken with her, but leaving Sarah behind without a word. Mom sighed deeply. If they're going to act so high and mighty, the least they could do is take proper care of Sarah. Sarah, meanwhile, was playing with my daughter, her usual bright smile plastered on her face, but as I watched her, I noticed something. Every so often, her smile faltered, replaced by a fleeting look of sadness. She must have realized her family had left without her. That brave smile broke my heart. Sarah shouldn't have to carry the burden of our adult failures. I was more certain than ever that she didn't have a developmental disability, but rather, she was the victim of neglect and favoritism. Later that day, Kathy and Tim returned home in high spirits, shopping bags in hand. Mom's face darkened. "Do you often leave Sarah behind when you go out shopping?" "It's just leaving her at home. What's the problem?" Kathy shrugged. "The problem is, you don't leave Ken behind. Why treat Sarah differently?" "She doesn't listen, so we're teaching her discipline," Kathy argued. "Discipline her if you must, but don't just abandon her without explanation. That's cruel," Mom countered. Tim jumped in defensively. "We provide her with proper meals and a good education. Why do you keep criticizing us?" "That's the bare minimum for parenting," I said sharply. "You act like it's some grand favor. This is a family matter. Stay out of it." "Amanda," Tim snapped. "Sarah is my family too," I shot back. "She's my niece. If she's being mistreated, I won't stay silent." My words seemed to hit a nerve. Kathy and Tim avoided my gaze, but their silence spoke volumes. "If you suspect Sarah has a developmental disability, leaving her alone is even more irresponsible," Mike added. "That's why we're teaching her to stay home alone." Kathy slammed her hand on the table. The argument dragged on for hours, going nowhere. Eventually, Kathy and Tim left early the next morning, cutting their visit short. Their favoritism towards Ken was painfully obvious throughout their stay. At meals, if Ken's favorite shrimp was served, Kathy and Tim would give him extra portions, even taking from Sarah's plate. Sarah, clearly used to this treatment, never protested. Instead, she simply complied, a resigned look on her face. The same pattern repeated itself in other ways. Promises of new toys and games were made to Ken, while Sarah was ignored. All family conversations revolved around Ken's achievements, leaving Sarah to sit quietly on the sidelines. It was heartbreaking to witness. One day, Kathy showed up unannounced with Sarah. "Can you take care of her just for today?" she asked. Even Sarah seemed confused by the sudden request. She glanced at me and said softly, "I could just play in the park instead." Without asking too many questions, we agreed to look after her. When Kathy returned later that evening, she seemed apologetic. "Thanks for watching Sarah," she said. "Why the short notice?" I asked. "Oh, Ken had friends over. Their moms are all doctors and lawyers. You know, it'd be awkward to have Sarah around." I was stunned. "You're ashamed of your own daughter? She doesn't fit in with those families." "What can I do?" Kathy said with a laugh, as if it were a joke. "That's no excuse," I said firmly. "Whether Sarah has a disability or not, she's your daughter. You should be her biggest supporter, not her biggest critic." Kathy's smile vanished. "You've only raised one child. Don't lecture me." With that, she yanked Sarah by the arm and left. These patterns continued. Kathy and Tim would leave Sarah with us, often for long periods, while they took Ken on elaborate outings. They showed up late to pick her up, offered no apologies, and acted like nothing was wrong. Their actions only reinforced my determination to step in. Sarah deserved better than the hand she'd been dealt. and I was going to do everything in my power to ensure she got it. I told you to call before coming over, didn't I? And why didn't you stick to the agreed time? My tone was sharper than usual, even in front of Sarah. I couldn't help it, I was furious. Oh, don't be so picky, Kathy replied nonchalantly. We're here to pick her up, aren't we? That's a given, I snapped. But you can't just drop her off carelessly without proper planning. What's with you lately? Always so irritated, is it menopause? Kathy quipped with a smirk. Tim burst into loud laughter, finding her remark hilarious. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep calm. You two are unbelievable. I keep repeating myself, you need to rethink how you're raising your kids. We are thinking about it, Kathy shot back. That's why Ken is involved in so many activities. Unlike your daughter, who doesn't do anything. We respect our daughter's wishes, because she said she didn't want to participate in those things. Well, we're respecting Ken's wishes, too. Isn't that right, Ken? Kathy turned to him. Ken nodded weakly, his forced smile betraying his true feelings. See? Kathy said triumphantly. Even Ken agrees. I sighed deeply. I'm tired of repeating myself. Fine, just take Sarah and go. Kathy grabbed Sarah by the arm, practically dragging her toward the car. Tim didn't say a word as he started the engine, leaving us standing there, feeling defeated once again. The next day, I was out shopping when I received a text from Kathy. Hey Amanda, you love Sarah, right? Confused, I replied, of course I do. She's my niece. Why are you asking this? Her response left me stunned. Great. Perfect. Consider her your daughter now. I left her at your doorstep. I didn't see anyone home, so you should hurry back. She might be crying alone. I froze in the middle of the store, rereading her message in disbelief. Was this some kind of joke? I called her immediately, but her phone was off. Panic set in. I abandoned my cart and rushed home. When I arrived, my heart sank. Sarah was sitting on the ground in front of the door, crying uncontrollably. Her face was buried in her hands, her small body shaking with sobs. Sarah, I ran to her and pulled her into a hug. She clung to me tightly, tears soaking my shoulder. It's okay, sweetheart. I'm here. It was clear what had happened. Even without asking, Kathy had abandoned her. Calls to Kathy and Tim's phones went unanswered. They had deliberately cut off contact. Through her tears, Sarah whispered, Auntie, I didn't want to be left like that. I held her close, my anger toward Kathy and Tim boiling over. How could they be so cruel? Right then and there, I made a promise to Sarah, and to myself, I would protect her. She didn't deserve this. Within a week, my husband, mother-in-law, and I went to Kathy's house to confront them. We brought along legal paperwork to formalize Sarah's adoption. Our plan was clear, Sarah would become our daughter. To our surprise, Kathy and Tim agreed without much resistance. Less burden for us, Kathy said with a dismissive shrug as she signed the papers. Her lack of remorse infuriated me, but I held my tongue. Sarah's well-being was my only priority. 3 months later, Kathy showed up at our house unexpectedly. We want Sarah back, she said, as if the past few months had never happened. What are you talking about? I asked, incredulous. She's a genius, Kathy exclaimed. I just found out she won an art contest. Her painting was displayed at the bank. We didn't even know she liked to draw. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. Of course you didn't know, because you never paid attention to her. That contest? I submitted her artwork myself. Her preschool has been encouraging you to nurture her talents for years, but you ignored them. Kathy's face flushed with embarrassment. Well, it doesn't matter now, just give her back. I shook my head. It's not that simple. The adoption is finalized. Sarah is our daughter now, but if she wants to go back to you, I won't stop her. She'll choose me, Kathy said smugly. Watch. I called Sarah into the room. When she saw Kathy, she hesitated, then clung to me. Mama, she said softly, a name she'd started using to combine mom and auntie. Kathy reached for her, but Ken stepped in front of his mother protectively. Ken, what are you doing here? Don't you have lessons? Kathy demanded. Ken's voice trembled as he replied, I don't want to go to lessons anymore. I hate them. I hate everything you make me do. Kathy tried to scold him, but I stopped her. Don't you get it? Your children don't want what you're forcing on them. You've been so focused on appearances and achievements that you've completely ignored their happiness. Kathy stood there, speechless. Just go home, I said firmly. You've lost the right to call yourself their mother. In the years that followed, our family dynamic flourished. Sarah, Ken, and our daughter grew close, forming a bond stronger than I could have imagined. Ken moved in with my mother, and Sarah thrived in our home, pursuing her passion for art. Though the road was challenging, it was worth every step. Our two-family household was filled with love, laughter, and the joy of watching the kids grow into their unique talents. Kathy and Tim, meanwhile, drifted into isolation, burdened by the consequences of their selfishness. Our lives weren't perfect, but they were rich with the one thing that mattered most: family. My husband, Brian, whom I supported through thick and thin, was promoted to department head, but then he was taken away by my best friend. He discarded me and the child we had raised together, betraying me as completely as my once trusted friend. It was the lowest point of my life, but thanks to my daughter, who was now an adult starting her career, I managed to recover and move forward. 2 years later, I ran into them unexpectedly in the city. My former best friend sneered as she glanced at the man standing beside me. "A poor-looking old man suits you well," she said smugly. I smiled calmly. "Good to see you. Don't you recognize me?" She looked confused. My ex-husband rushed over, panicking. I turned to them both and said, "Let me introduce myself properly. My name is Sarah. Until 2 years ago, I was Sarah Ingram." 2 years ago, my husband Matt, the man I married at 24 after a whirlwind romance, asked me for a divorce. It happened just after he was promoted to department head. I had met Matt when I was a new hire, fresh out of college, and he was my senior colleague and mentor. Not long into our relationship, I discovered I was pregnant. Without hesitation, we decided to marry, and I left my job to focus on our child, Emma, who is now 22 and thriving in her career. I had thought I could finally enjoy the second half of my life with Matt. With Emma grown and independent, we'd have more time for each other. But that hope was shattered on the day Matt came home wearing a distant expression. I had prepared a special dinner to celebrate his promotion. When he sat down, he avoided my eyes. "We need to talk," he said gravely. My heart sank, but I tried to stay optimistic. Maybe he wanted to talk about our future now that his career was stable. I had imagined he might thank me for my years of support or even surprise me with plans for a vacation. Instead, his words cut through me like a knife. "I want a divorce. I've fallen in love with someone else." I was stunned. 4 years, I had supported him, raising Emma largely on my own while he chased his ambitions. I believed him every time he said he was busy with work dinners or business golf. I hadn't seen any signs of his betrayal. My life revolved around our family, and I thought I could rely on his gratitude and loyalty. But instead, Matt left me for my best friend. They both betrayed the trust one had placed in them. Alone and heartbroken, I struggled to rebuild my life. It was Emma who kept me going, her strength and determination inspiring me to move forward. Now, 2 years later, as I stood face to face with them in the city, I felt nothing but calm. The man next to me, a kind and supportive partner, smiled as I introduced myself anew. My ex-husband and former friend looked shaken, but I was unbothered. I had already reclaimed my life. I chose not to complain and supported Matt from behind the scenes. I had witnessed firsthand the challenges he faced after our unexpected pregnancy and my decision to resign from work. One of Matt's superiors once said, "He's a rookie with a slow work pace, but he sure knows how to get a woman pregnant fast." That stung both of us deeply. Matt faced constant criticism, and not all of our colleagues supported our decision to get married. Despite this, he endured the judgment and worked tirelessly to prove himself. His dedication eventually paid off with an early promotion to department head. I wanted to ensure his success reflected well on both of us. I went out of my way to choose thoughtful gifts for his bosses and their families, even when it took extra effort. At company events, I smiled politely, aware I was being judged for leaving work early or stepping away from my career. I didn't mind. I did all of it because I believed in him and wanted to see him succeed. But rather than thank me for my unwavering support, Matt delivered the ultimate betrayal. Until the day he asked for a divorce, I hadn't suspected for a moment that Matt was having an affair. Was I foolish? Had I been blind to the signs? I had to know the truth, no matter how painful. "Who is she?" I asked, my voice trembling. Perhaps it was just an infatuation, and he wasn't serious about ending our family. Matt hesitated before responding. "You know her. She's someone close to you." My mind raced as I tried to piece it together. Was it a former coworker? One of Emma's friends? That idea felt too absurd, too inappropriate. It would make Matt look creepy. Could it be one of the families we knew through Emma's activities? like swimming or ballet, but Matt rarely participated in those events. He didn't even drive Emma to her lessons. "Just tell me," I said, my patience wearing thin. He sighed and shouted, "It's Michelle." Michelle? The name struck me like a blow. Michelle had been my best friend since childhood, the person I trusted most. We'd shared everything, our joys, our struggles, and even our families. When Matt and I got engaged, Michelle had asked me to introduce her to one of Matt's friends. She later married him, and they had a daughter, Jessica, who was 3 years younger than Emma. 4 years, we bonded over parenting, organizing barbecues, and sharing advice. I had never imagined she would betray me like this. Memories of Michelle flooded my mind. Once, when I was holding on to some of Emma's outgrown clothes, Michelle had joked, "Holding on to these things like this? That's the sign of a toxic parent. It's just stuff. Sarah, you need to let go, or you'll be that kind of mom." Her words had stung, but I took them to heart and tried to be less sentimental. Later, I gave Michelle some of Emma's old clothes and toys as hand-me-downs. However, I struggled to part with one item, Emma's preschool uniform. It held too many memories of her first year of school. I lied to Michelle, saying I might need it for another child, and asked her to return it once Jessica was done with it. Michelle's marriage didn't last, and by the time Jessica was in kindergarten, she and her husband divorced. When she handed me back the preschool uniform, I was relieved to have it again, even though it was worn and patched. But her words stung as she handed it over. "Must be nice to be a housewife." "Huh, Sarah, I'm still dating, but as a single parent, I can't give Jessica a sibling." At the time, Michelle hadn't shared the details of her marital problems. I empathized with her struggles, but I was also dealing with my own disappointments. I had wanted a second child, but Matt's long hours and lack of interest left no room for that discussion. I let go of that dream, feeling grateful that I was better off than Michelle in some ways. But now, hearing Matt utter her name, the betrayal felt unbearable. Michelle, who once accused me of still dating my own husband, had stolen him from me. "The guy you introduced me to left me for another woman, Sarah," she had once said bitterly. I hadn't denied it then, only smiled sympathetically. I never imagined she would turn around and do the same thing to me. Michelle picked a fight with me not long after her divorce. It all started because she'd asked me to introduce her to someone I barely knew, her now ex-husband. When I first met him, Michelle was immediately drawn to his looks and made it her mission to pursue him. I had advised her to take things slow and really get to know him, but she didn't listen. Later, when her marriage fell apart, she blamed me. I was confused but sympathetic, recognizing she needed a friend to lean on during a tough time. I didn't hold it against her. After her divorce, I tried to support Michelle and her daughter, Jessica, however I could. I even registered as Jessica's emergency contact at her daycare. If Jessica got sick and Michelle couldn't leave work, I'd pick her up, take her to the doctor, and look after her until Michelle was free. I adjusted my part-time work schedule to be there for Jessica when she started middle school, as she spent afternoons at my house instead of daycare. It wasn't easy, but I wanted to help. When my own daughter, Emma, graduated from elementary school and moved on to middle school, my life took a turn. A clerk at my part-time job got married and relocated, and my company offered me a full-time position. Matt, my husband, supported the idea of increasing our household income, and Emma was on board too. After years of focusing on family, I was excited to take on this new chapter. However, working full-time meant I couldn't continue looking after Jessica after school. Michelle and I had to adjust. Jessica began coming home to an empty house, but I figured it wasn't my responsibility anymore. Life moved on. Over the next 9 years, Michelle and I saw less of each other. Although we didn't meet as often as we had when our daughters were young, I still considered her my best friend. Then, one day, Matt's unexpected words shattered that illusion. "I want a divorce. I'm in love with Michelle." His declaration hit me like a ton of bricks. I tried to laugh it off, thinking it had to be some kind of joke. "You're kidding, right? Michelle is my best friend." But Matt's expression was deadly serious. "I know she's your best friend, but I've fallen for her. I can't help how I feel." I stared at him, stunned. How could a 49-year-old man with a 22-year-old daughter speak so childishly? It felt like I was trapped in some absurd soap opera. "So it's just your crush, right? Michelle would never betray me." Desperate for clarity, I called Michelle. She picked up immediately. "Michelle, can you come over? Matt's saying some crazy things." But instead of laughing it off, Michelle chuckled. "Oh, I already know. Matt told me he was asking you for a divorce today." "You knew?" My heart sank. "You've been talking to him?" Her voice was cheerful, almost gleeful. "Yes, Sarah, I'm sorry, but Matt's in love with me now. He wants to divorce you and marry me." The world seemed to spin. This had to be a cruel joke. My husband and my best friend conspiring together? It was too much to believe. Matt left the room muttering something about going out for a smoke, something he hadn't done since I was pregnant. When had he started again? When he returned, he wasn't alone. Michelle walked in beside him, and they both looked resolute. "Sarah, I'm really sorry," Matt began, "but we've confirmed our feelings for each other. Michelle is the right partner for me now." Despite her words of apology, Michelle's smirk was unmistakable. I couldn't help but snap. "Didn't you already have a boyfriend, Michelle? You always did, even after your divorce. And some of them supported you financially." Her expression hardened. "Sarah, don't bring that up in front of Matt. Those boyfriends were just temporary. The truth is, I've always loved Matt." She even mustered fake tears, putting on a melodramatic display. To my shock, Matt reached out and stroked her hair tenderly. "Sarah, don't blame Michelle," he said softly, as if this betrayal was something I simply needed to accept. It was like Matt wanted to cast himself as some tragic hero in this ridiculous drama. Watching him and Michelle, I could hardly believe these people were real. My heart shattered as tears rolled silently down my cheeks. I whispered, "Since when?" "We've been meeting in secret for a long time," Michelle admitted shamelessly, "but we only started talking seriously about marriage after Matt's promotion was confirmed." I felt like a fool. I had trusted them both, and now it was clear they had been betraying me behind my back. Michelle must have seen Matt's promotion as an opportunity to improve her own life and latched onto the idea of marriage. Her arrogance was unbearable. "So now that you know, hurry up and divorce him already," she said, smirking. Her attitude made my tears feel ridiculous. I forced myself to respond, "Fine, I'll divorce him," but I couldn't resist asking, "What about Jessica? Does she know?" "Don't ignore your daughter's feelings." At the mention of Jessica, Matt's face briefly registered guilt. He dropped his gaze. "Jessica turned 18 and moved out. She's no longer my responsibility," he muttered. Then, astonishingly, he added, "It's probably your fault she turned out so defiant, considering how much time she spent with you." Their callousness was staggering. I hadn't spoken to Jessica in some time, so I hadn't even known she had moved out. When Matt produced the divorce papers, with Michelle's signature already on the guarantor section, I couldn't muster the energy to argue. Seeing that grotesque document, I agreed to the divorce on the spot. Matt packed his things and moved out to live with Michelle. I never thought Michelle would have the audacity to treat my husband like one of my daughter's hand-me-down clothes. Yet here we were. When Emma returned from her business trip the next day, I told her everything. Her reaction was sharper than I expected. "That man isn't my father anymore," she said firmly. "And Michelle? She's the worst person I've ever known." Her words startled me, but I saw how strong Emma had become. I had worried she would be deeply hurt, but she handled the news better than I had imagined. Even so, her anger burned hot. "Have you talked to Jessica?" I asked. "I'm worried she might be struggling." "Mom, stop worrying about other people and start thinking about yourself," Emma said, her eyes brimming with tears. Seeing her so raw and vulnerable, I realized she had suffered more than she let on. I hugged her, something we hadn't done in years. I vowed to be a better parent, someone Emma could truly be proud of. 2 years passed without a word from Matt or Michelle. Emma thrived in her new independence, and we saw no reason to reach out to her father. Michelle had moved far away after marrying Matt, and our paths never crossed until one fateful evening. After attending a play, I ran into them in the city by chance. Our eyes met, and I couldn't avoid them. Michelle's mocking voice cut through the air. "A poor-looking old man suits you," she sneered, glancing disdainfully at the man beside me. I didn't take the bait. I had just enjoyed a lovely evening with my new boyfriend, Jonathan. He and I had been watching the play together. Instead of responding to her insult, I shot her a level look. "Good to see you, Michelle. Don't you recognize him?" Michelle's smug expression faltered, and she stared at Jonathan in disbelief. Matt looked equally stunned. "Wait, you're Jonathan?" Matt stammered. Jonathan had been Matt's senior at the company, mentoring him when he first started. He had once taken the fall for a mistake Matt made, which had cost Jonathan his job. I hadn't known this back then, but we reconnected recently through a mutual acquaintance. That's how we had started dating. Michelle's face twisted as she remembered. I had once introduced Jonathan to her as a potential partner, but she had rejected him, saying he was too old and not stylish enough. Now, Jonathan looked different, his appearance more polished and refined. Michelle's disdain for anything understated had blinded her to his true worth. Jonathan spoke calmly but firmly. Relax, Michelle. It's not a big company, and my income isn't huge, but starting my own business worked out for the best. Michelle's eyes widened in horror. What? He's a CEO? She blurted, her crassness on full display. If I'd known that, I wouldn't have married Matt. He's so cheap. Her outburst only made me pity her more. Jonathan, ever composed, simply shrugged. It's not about titles, Michelle. It's about character. Just then, I noticed Emma and Jessica standing nearby. Having overheard the scene, guilt tugged at me. They shouldn't have had to witness this embarrassment. Yet their expressions were resolute. Still relying on men after all these years, Emma said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. When will you ever learn? Michelle turned, startled, and suddenly adopted a parental tone. Jessica, Emma, how have you been? But their daughters weren't buying it. Jessica, standing tall, spoke with quiet strength. I loved you once, Mom, but after the divorce, you moved us around and dated random men. It made me uncomfortable and ashamed. I used to wish Miss Sarah was my mom. Her words pierced my heart. I hugged her tightly, feeling a bond stronger than ever before. Jonathan's voice broke the tension. Come on, let's leave these foolish people behind and go have a nice meal. We walked away, leaving Matt and Michelle to their hollow lives. Later, I learned from an old classmate that they had divorced. Matt had finally reached his breaking point after Michelle repeatedly belittled him. Emma and Jessica grew closer, like true sisters. Jonathan eventually proposed, and I accepted. Looking back, I realized my first marriage had been a mistake, but it had led me to where I belonged. Together, Jonathan, Emma, Jessica, and I are building a new life, filled with love and laughter.
You can't even handle household chores, so we might as well get a divorce, Tom, he said with a smirk as he entered the hospital room. I was connected to various medical devices, and a girl I didn't recognize stood by his side. Little did Tom know I had assets worth $6 million, and divorce in this situation would be a matter of life and death for a housewife like me. Fine, he has the divorce papers, I thought to myself. I couldn't be with a man who verbally abused his wife in such a state. I reached into my bag, pulled out the divorce papers I'd always carried with me, and handed them to Tom with a grin. He accepted them. Now I can say goodbye to you. I'll be happy with her, so don't worry, Tom said as he wrapped his arm around the girl, referred to as Catherine Lyon. She sneered at me and said, "Take care, Misso. You're not Miss anymore. Take care, ma'am." With those words, the two of them left the hospital room, laughing. But their happiness would only last for now. Alone in the room, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. Today was Friday, so the divorce would be processed on Monday. Oh, I couldn't wait for 3 days from now. My name is Annalie Johnson, a 45-year-old housewife from a regular farm. I didn't have any particular skills, but I was proud of my vast cooking repertoire. My husband, Tom, and I were the same age and had been college classmates. We both came to New York from the countryside, and since we lived alone, I used to cook various dishes for Tom using the vegetables and rice sent from my family. People often said I had captured his heart through his stomach, and I was aware of that. Tom was and still is incapable of doing any household chores. I had been taking care of him since we were dating, and after getting married, I continued to handle all household tasks. Sadly, we were not blessed with children, but we enjoyed our life together as a couple. We both loved to eat, and on Tom's days off, we'd often go on drives for small trips just to enjoy delicious food. When we first got married, Tom was kind. But about 3 years in, he became quite controlling. Well, he never laid a hand on me, but his remarks became curt, and he would often say things that hurt. But I didn't have the energy to fight back, assuming he wouldn't listen anyway. Because I was a full-time housewife, I felt inferior and couldn't stand up to him. Tom joined a renowned company after graduating from university, but he resigned after about 5 years. He quickly found new jobs, but would resign from them after short periods. Because of this, our income was unstable, and we often struggled with our finances. However, at the company he'd been with for the past 2 years, he seemed to get along with his colleagues. I had faint hopes that he might work there for a long time. Then one day, Tom came home earlier than usual. "I'm home. I quit my job." "What again?" I unintentionally voiced my surprise, causing Tom's eyebrows to twitch. In a panic, I stopped cooking and rushed over to him. "I'm sorry. I was just shocked." "Huh, no welcome back greeting, and you're criticizing." "You've become quite audacious," Tom responded sharply. At Tom's words, I stiffened. He was in a very bad mood today, and if I misspoke, it could escalate into something worse. "I'm sorry," I said cautiously. "As long as you understand," he grumbled. My apology had somewhat placated him, and he sat on the sofa, turning on the TV. I quietly placed a beer and a glass on the table. "Do you want dinner or a bath?" I asked. "Food and alcohol," he replied. To avoid upsetting Tom, I played the role of the submissive wife. I once had a strong sense of self, but after 14 years of marriage to Tom since the age of 28, I rarely showed my true self. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Tom seemed to be in a better mood. He fell asleep on the sofa, snoring loudly. The table was in such disarray that it looked like a child had eaten there. I began cleaning up the fallen beer bottles and food scraps scattered on the floor. This wasn't how I had envisioned my married life. Memories of happier days as a young girl in love revealed my true feelings. I stole a glance at Tom, but he showed no signs of waking. Relief washed over me, but alongside it was a growing sense of dread about continuing this life. Perhaps divorce was a consideration. I started mentally organizing my schedule for the next day, determined to confront the issues I have been avoiding. The following day, while Tom began visiting the employment office and quickly securing another job, I went to the city office and signed divorce papers. I wasn't quite ready to submit them, but I felt having them would be a form of protection. I discreetly stashed the signed divorce papers at the bottom of my frequently used bag. If he were to discover them, who knew what he might say or do? "Hey, where did you wander off to while I was job hunting?" Tom asked upon my return. "I went to the stationery store to buy some reasons." "Look, I thought you might need them," I replied. Tom was unusually thoughtful that day. He initially interrogated me suspiciously, but quickly cheered up. I handed him the resumes I had bought earlier. After receiving them, Tom mentioned that he was going out for drinks with a friend and left. His new job was with a reputable company, offering a solid salary and better benefits than his previous positions. I harbored a secret hope that perhaps, this time, Tom would stick with his new job until retirement. His new department seemed to be in sales, and he started leaving home more frequently for evening entertainment. I cherished these brief moments of freedom and gathered the energy to greet Tom with a smile when he returned. One day, I received a call from my mother after a long time. She excitedly told me about an unexpected windfall of $6 million. "You know the mountains and lands we owned? We don't need them anymore. We had them appraised, and they are worth $8 million. We only need $1 million to enjoy the rest of our lives, so I think you might want to rethink your life too." My mother was never fond of Tom, and she had been worried about me, especially after Tom became more controlling, preventing me from even visiting my childhood home. The amount she mentioned stunned me, but what shocked me even more was that she had changed the title of the property inherited from my grandmother to my name to avoid inheritance taxes. It was a difficult decision whether to tell Tom about the inheritance or to embrace newfound freedom. About a week later, I was involved in a traffic accident. Thankfully, my life wasn't in danger, but I would need to be hospitalized for about a week. After securing my valuables in the hospital room drawer, I immediately contacted Tom. "I'm sorry I got injured." Tom's initial reaction was, "Huh? What about my meals?" I almost confronted him for prioritizing his meals over my injury, but I continued to explain, "It seems I'll need to be hospitalized for a week. I'm really sorry, but could you buy your meals elsewhere until then?" Tom's response was far from understanding. Not even preparing meals for your husband? What a lazy wife. Oh, wait, I'm coming over now. He abruptly ended the call. I had initially planned to tell him about the inheritance that night, but now I wondered if it might be best not to mention it. As I lay in the hospital bed, surrounded by various tubes and undergoing precautionary examinations, I couldn't help but feel that my intuition about the unfolding events was about to prove correct. Tom's words had cut deep. You're useless, can't even do housework. Let's get a divorce, and you better pay me compensation. With a smirk on his face, he had said this to me, connected to numerous medical devices. Beside him stood a girl I didn't recognize. Unaware that my total assets amounted to $6 million. He should have realized that a divorce under these circumstances would be a matter of life and death for me. Fine, here are the divorce papers, I finally decided. A man who would hurl abuse at his wife in this condition was someone I'd rather not have. I handed over the divorce papers I had kept as a sort of charm, and Tom accepted them with a smug smile on his face. With this, I can finally say goodbye to you. I'm going to be happy with her, he declared, wrapping his arm around the girl he referred to as Catherine. Catherine, the girl with Tom, leaned against him and made fun of me. Take care, madam. Oh, you're not a madam anymore. Take care, old lady, she said. They left the room laughing, but their happiness wouldn't last long. In my hospital room, I burst out laughing. It was Friday, and the divorce papers would be processed on Monday. I couldn't wait for those 3 days. As expected, the weekend passed without any contact from Tom. It was quite peaceful, but I felt restless. I wasn't used to doing nothing. Every time I became restless, the nurses told me to stay calm. On Monday evening, I received a series of calls from Tom. At first, I ignored them, but after about 30 minutes of nonstop ringing, I decided to answer. I told him to stop being so persistent. Tom shouted at me as soon as I picked up, and I couldn't help but laugh, which seemed to make him even angrier. Tom was furious about the divorce papers not being accepted. I chuckled and told him that I had previously filed a notice of non-acceptance. I reminded him of how he used to casually mention getting divorced whenever we had a fight. I thought it wouldn't be a good idea if he filed for divorce on a whim during one of our arguments. Tom was upset but quickly changed his mind. He wanted me to withdraw the non-acceptance immediately. However, I had decided that I wouldn't just do everything he said anymore. I explained that I couldn't do it until I was discharged, and we needed to go through procedures at the municipal office before I could leave the hospital. Tom's selfish demands made me laugh even more. It seemed like he wanted to register his marriage with Catherine, whom he brought on Friday. Tom was panicking, and I asked if her name was Catherine and if she was his mistress. Tom clarified that she was his new wife, and since we weren't divorced yet, she technically was my mistress. I calmly responded to Tom's nonsensical remarks, making him groan. I made the decision to hit him where it hurt the most. I mentioned that he would hear from my lawyer about the division of property, including the trouble this time. I had always taken care of the household chores and had never cheated on him. It was clear that Tom was the responsible party, not me. Tom seemed genuinely puzzled and believed that not taking care of him while I was hospitalized would make me at fault. I explained patiently that not being able to do housework during my hospitalization didn't make me at fault. He had abandoned taking care of me, and even if I were a child, it would be considered neglect. But as an adult, he should be able to take care of himself, so it didn't make me at fault. Tom's logic was baffling, and even a judge would be shocked. Finally, he seemed to understand, but he still believed he was right. He insisted that Catherine was his new wife, and I was no longer of any use to him, so it didn't apply. I pointed out that he was dating her behind my back, which was clearly cheating. Tom still didn't seem to get it, and he believed he was right. I decided to end the conversation and told him to communicate through a lawyer from now on. I hung up the phone without listening to his protests. Tom called multiple times, but I ignored him, and eventually he gave up and fell silent. I was relieved, that the next day brought another headache. The phone kept ringing from 9 o'clock in the morning, and I pressed the call button. Tom complained about not being able to withdraw money from a bank account. If it was a joint account, he should be able to withdraw without any issues. But I remembered the bank cards and passbooks I had left at home and asked Tom if he was trying to access my account. Tom confirmed that he was trying to take money from my account. Tom was furious and continued with his unreasonable arguments. He didn't seem to understand what I had explained the day before. When I was going to be hospitalized for a week, I had called the bank to prevent any withdrawals until I could handle it personally after being discharged. This was to stop Tom, who wasn't careful with money, from using my savings while I was in the hospital. My decision turned out to be the right one. It's not right to try to take money from an ex-wife's account, especially after a divorce. However, Tom didn't see anything wrong with it and asked me to make a withdrawal immediately. I reminded him that we were practically strangers now, and I had no money to give to strangers. Tom was shocked by my resistance since I had never stood up to him like this before. He insisted that I send the money and pay compensation for not doing housework. Unfortunately, it seemed that despite his academic capability when we first met, he lacked common sense after 17 years of marriage. I addressed Tom as if he were a child, explaining that I was no longer his submissive wife, and we would settle the property division through a lawyer. He became angry and threatened to come over right away. I didn't mind if he came to the hospital, but I had already asked the nurse's station not to let anyone in except for my parents, so it was unlikely he could get to my room. However, Tom did come to the hospital, but it seemed he was stopped at the nurse's station as my phone kept ringing. After ignoring it for a while, it switched to messages, and my screen was flooded with notifications. I saved all of them as evidence and contacted my lawyer. After a while, it seemed that the lawyer had gotten in touch with Tom as the messages stopped coming in. Just when I thought it was over, there was a new development. I was informed about a visitor named Karen, whom I had known for a long time and shared my interests. She had responded to my posts about dining experiences on a social media platform. We used to go out for meals together before I got married. She expressed concern about my injury and shared her suspicions that Catherine, the young girl with Tom, was having an affair with my husband. I was shocked and asked her how she knew it. It turned out that Catherine was Karen's niece. She had told her sister, Karen's mother, about getting married to a 45-year-old man, and when Karen saw a photo, it was of my husband. I couldn't believe the twist of fate. Karen had already informed her sister about the trouble her niece had caused me. Karen was thinking of demanding compensation from Catherine and assured me that our friendship would continue. She didn't want to lose a precious friend over the situation. She had scheduled a meeting with them to sort things out. I was grateful for her support and friendship, which had lasted for over 20 years. The next day, after leaving the hospital, I went to a private restaurant room with my lawyer. Tom and Catherine were already there, enjoying an expensive traditional meal. I was surprised at their audacity. Tom reminded me to bring money and pay for the meal. I decided to stand up for myself and told them to handle the payment themselves. I was there to demand a share of the assets from both of them. Ignoring Tom's rude comments, my lawyer and I took our seats and presented evidence to show that Tom was at fault. We showed legal documents explaining why Tom was responsible and documents regarding the division of property. We'd also displayed photos provided by Karen, which showed Tom and Catherine together and Catherine with an unknown man entering a hotel. This surprised Tom and Catherine, and they stopped eating. Karen arrived at the right moment and admitted to taking those photos. Catherine was confused about her aunt being there. Karen explained that she wanted to continue being friends with me, even though she demanded compensation from Catherine. She felt that Catherine's actions were despicable. Catherine mentioned being pregnant, but when Karen saw her, she didn't look pregnant at all. Tom seemed shocked by this news, and Catherine suddenly admitted that she had lied about the pregnancy and apologized. She had been looking for wealthy older men, and Tom was the one who fell for her scheme. She confessed that she had lied about being pregnant because Tom showed no signs of wanting to divorce. Tom was speechless, claiming he had no money to give. Karen mentioned that she would bring Catherine for another apology later and took her out of the restaurant. Tom tried to convince me that he had been deceived and asked if we could start over. He said I couldn't work since I had always been a housewife. I told him I could live without him and that I'd be filing the divorce papers soon. I revealed that I had around $6 million in personal net worth, so I could live comfortably without working. Tom was surprised and wanted a share of my money, but I explained that it was my personal inheritance and didn't count as marital assets. We left, and I filed for divorce, ending our nearly 20-year marriage. Catherine later transferred some money to my account, and her mother made her work to prepare the compensation. Tom was disowned by his in-laws and had to take out a loan to pay me. He lost his job due to being with Catherine at a hotel during work hours and now works multiple construction jobs to repay his debts. I used the money I received for charity and moved to the countryside with the remaining amount. I'm now enjoying a luxurious single life, continuing my relationship with Karen. We plan to stay single and even share a room, go on food tours, and take short trips together. Moving preparations will begin next week, and I'm excited to live life joyfully and true to myself from now on.
Since both my parents worked full-time, I attended daycare from a young age and grew up watching them work tirelessly every day. Inspired by their dedication, I dreamed of becoming a successful career woman, an independent person who could stand on her own without relying on anyone else. Fueled by this ambition and my naturally strong personality, I became highly competitive as a child. If I fell during a race in PE class, I would get back up without crying, determined to finish strong. If I didn't score at the top of my class on a test, I'd stay up late studying until I achieved better results. Failure was never an option for me. You don't always have to be number one, Sarah, my parents would say. We just want you to shine as yourself. We're proud of your hard work. But remember, it's important to lean on your family too. We're here to support you. I carried that advice with me as I entered a prestigious high school known for its rigorous academic standards. Passing the entrance exam with top scores was a milestone, and it was there that I first met Mark, someone who would eventually change my life. Mark had the highest grades in the entrance exam and delivered the freshman speech at the opening ceremony. I've always worked hard and never feared failure, he said during his speech. It's okay not to be number one. I believe failure is a valuable experience. Those words resonated deeply with me, reminding me of my father's similar encouragements. I felt an instant connection to Mark. As fate would have it, we were placed in the same advanced class, a group of the top students in the school. Despite the competitive environment, Mark consistently outperformed everyone. As we grew closer, Mark shared stories of his upbringing. I've never placed second in academics or sports, he said, his tone a mix of pride and humility. My mom was strict, but I'm grateful. It made me capable of handling almost anything. Meeting his mother at the entrance ceremony, I understood where his drive came from. She exuded strength and sophistication, and her influence was evident in Mark's achievements. Over our 3 years of high school together, Mark excelled at everything. He was a class leader, the anchor for our relay team, the choir competition conductor, and always topped the exams. Though I admired him deeply, and had a quiet crush, I never acted on my feelings. He seemed out of reach, a level of perfection I could only aspire to. After high school, I focused on my own goals, determined to carve out a path of success. I faced multiple job rejections, but I never gave up. Eventually, I landed a position at a top company, a prestigious opportunity, even though it was my 5th choice. This marked my first step toward my childhood dream of becoming a career woman. As one of the few women hired for a general position at the time, I worked tirelessly. My days were a blur of travel, running in heels I wasn't yet used to, and striving for both financial and emotional independence. While I occasionally exchanged emails with my parents, I avoided burdening them with my struggles. I knew they were aging, and I wanted to reassure them that I could handle things on my own. Yet, As I approached 30, I couldn't help but feel unsettled watching my friends settle down and start families. When an invitation to my high school reunion arrived, I decided to step away from my work-focused life for a night and attend. Seeing my old classmates was both surreal and heartwarming. Amid the laughter and reminiscing, I heard a familiar voice. "Sarah, is that you? Wow, you look amazing." "Mark." I turned to see him, looking just as sharp as I remembered. "It's been so long, you haven't aged a bit." We fell into easy conversation, catching up on the years we had missed. Mark was now a top salesman at a multinational company, a dream role I had once aspired to myself. I just won first place in the company's young sales division, he shared with a modest smile. They even held an award ceremony for me. Mark still carried the aura of an elite achiever, but he was more laid back than I remembered. His suit fit him perfectly, and I couldn't help but admire the man he had become. As we talked, I told him about my own career and how hard I had been working. That night, our connection rekindled, and soon after, we began dating. Although our busy schedules limited how much time we could spend together, I was happier than I had been in years. Slowly, I began to consider that life might be more than just work. Perhaps it was time to build something lasting, a home, a family, a future beyond my career. On our one-year anniversary, Mark proposed, and I said yes. After more than a decade, we were finally coming together. At 30, marriage felt like a significant milestone, filling me with both joy and uncertainty. My demanding job required me to travel frequently, and I faced a difficult choice: should I request a transfer, stay in my current role, or even consider a career change? Mark, ever supportive, reminded me how much I loved my work. I trusted that Mark would support whatever decision I made, though I carried mixed feelings as I went to meet his mother, Amy. Since Mark's father had passed away a few years earlier, it was just her now. Amy had always seemed strict, but when I saw her again, she looked even thinner and more severe than I remembered. "So, you're Sarah," she said, her eyes assessing me. "I hear you were Mark's classmate in high school. Graduating from that school means you must be quite smart." "I'm not sure about smart," I replied nervously, "but I work hard. I'm at a large company in a position not typically held by women. I'm currently leading a major project." As I continued explaining myself, Amy suddenly smiled. That's enough. I can see you're very capable." I felt a wave of relief, thinking I'd earned her approval, but then she added, "You know, I don't need a career woman. A woman's job is to take care of the home, send her husband off with a smile, have a warm meal ready when he returns, and raise the children properly." That's what I did, and it's what I expect from you. Her words left me stunned. Mark had never mentioned any of this. "She's right," Mark said casually. "I'll make the money, you don't need to work." Although being a successful, independent woman had been my childhood dream, I couldn't deny that I was physically and mentally exhausted from the demands of my job. Amy pressed on. "A woman's happiness is in supporting her husband. If you keep working, people might think Mark can't support his family." I looked to Mark for support, but he just nodded in agreement with his mother. It shocked me. I thought times had changed, that people no longer saw working wives as a reflection on their husbands. "But I'm not very good at housework," I protested weakly. "I've focused on my career, so I might need some help." "That's concerning," Amy said, frowning, "but I can teach you. After all, we'll be living together." "Living together?" I asked, startled. Mark had never mentioned this. "Yes," Amy said matter-of-factly. "This house is too big for me alone. There's plenty of space for you, Mark, and any future grandkids. Why waste money on a separate home?" I felt overwhelmed and trapped by her expectations. Just as I was trying to process it all, Mark spoke again. "I'm not the kind of guy who needs his wife to work," he said. "I make more than enough to support us. Besides, you're so talented that if you ever want to go back to work, I'm sure you'll find something quickly." His confidence in my abilities felt like a small consolation. I decided to give their way a try and resigned from my job. My colleagues were surprised and tried to convince me to stay, but they also told me I was welcome back anytime if I changed my mind. Their encouragement gave me a sense of security as I left the workforce. The next few months were spent learning from Amy. She was strict, but after years of working in a tough, male-dominated environment, her sternness didn't faze me. Not long after, I found out I was pregnant. When our daughter Lily was born, Mark was overjoyed, and to my surprise, Amy doted on Lily. "Lily is just the cutest, isn't she?" Amy would coo, her affection heartwarming but fleeting. Her demands on me increased. "I'll take care of Lily, you focus on the housework," she'd say. we're running low on supplies, can you do the shopping? Dragging my postpartum body around to keep up with the housework was exhausting, but having Amy care for Lily was helpful. Mark was rarely home, busy with work, so I appreciated the support, even if it came with constant demands. Amy's generosity extended only to Lily and Mark. She made sure Lily had the best of everything, but never offered me so much as a kind word. Mark's career soared as he climbed the ranks at his company, seemingly invincible, until he wasn't. One evening, when Lily was in upper elementary school, Mark came home looking pale and defeated. "Mark, what's wrong?" I asked, concerned. He slumped into a chair and buried his face in his hands. "It's over," he said. "I made a huge mistake at work. The client was furious, my boss berated me, and even my juniors pitted me. I couldn't take it, so I quit." I stared at him in disbelief. "You quit? Over one mistake? Lily's about to start private middle school, we need that income." Even Amy, usually unflappable, looked distressed. "Can't you go back and apologize? Fix things?" she asked. "No," Mark said firmly, "I can't show my face there again. Everyone thinks I'm a failure." Mark had never faced failure before, and now he was completely unraveling. He locked himself in his room, leaving me to pick up the pieces. "Sarah," Amy said sharply, "you need to go out and work." "But you always said a woman's job is to stay home," I protested. Amy's face hardened. "The inheritance is gone. Mark's probably spent most of your savings too. We have no choice." Stunned, I realized how little I'd known about our financial situation. There was no time to dwell on it. I reached out to my old company, relying on my career experience and determination, and was fortunate to be rehired. I threw myself into work, becoming the family's breadwinner. Though the transition was overwhelming, we stabilized financially. Lily attended private school, and I supported Amy and Mark. Mark remained distant, his bitterness showing in his silence and occasional barbs. I wanted to urge him to rebuild his life, but held back, focusing instead on keeping our family afloat. Amy, for her part, returned to her old ways, showing little gratitude and worrying only about Mark's well-being. Meanwhile, Mark began withdrawing more, taking money from our accounts and wandering aimlessly. Looking back, I couldn't help but wonder how things had spiraled so far. I realized I should have left or confronted Mark long ago, but I couldn't bring myself to abandon the man who had once supported me. While I worked tirelessly, Mark wasted his days in idleness. Lily, now old enough to understand, watched her father with a mix of sadness and disdain, and it was clear Mark sensed her disappointment. The tension at home was suffocating. When Lily was in middle school, Mark finally left us. He left a note: "You'll be fine without me. I found someone who needs me." I was stunned. Amy, in her grief, lashed out at me. "This is your fault. You drove him away. I never want to see you or Lily again." She even tried to evict us. "Wait, how will you manage without me?" I asked, bewildered. "Don't underestimate me. I don't need you," she snapped. And so, Lily and I packed our things and left the house. By then, Lily was mature enough to help with household chores while I focused on my career. We were busy, but we found happiness in our small but peaceful life. I didn't file for divorce immediately since I had no idea where Mark was. After 7 years of no contact, he was legally declared dead, which simplified the process. 10 years passed. Lily graduated from university and started her career, becoming a strong, successful woman. I was proud of her, and of myself, for navigating the hardships we faced. I was dating Tham, a kind and dependable man, and we lived together in a cozy home. Life felt complete. Then, one day, I received a call from an unknown number. Thinking it might be work-related, I answered. "Sarah, it's me. I had a hard time finding your number," the voice said. It was Mark. "What do you want?" I asked, my heart pounding. "I'm in trouble. Please help me. We're still family, right? It's your duty to help your husband." The nerve of him. "You abandoned us for 10 years. How dare you call now? We're not family anymore. Don't contact me again." I hung up, furious and shaken. I didn't tell Tom about the call and tried to move on. But a few days later, I returned home early to find shadows near my front door. Fearing it was an intruder, I approached cautiously. It was Mark and Amy. "Finally, you're home. We've been waiting," Mark said, looking desperate. "What are you doing here?" I demanded. "Please, Sarah, we've had our differences, but we're still family. I need your help." Mark explained that after leaving me, he had moved in with a younger woman named Emily, who needed him. However, their life quickly spiraled out of control. Mark worked low-paying jobs to maintain a facade of success, borrowing heavily to impress Emily. Amy, who had tracked Mark down, moved in with him, only to find herself living in poverty. "I'm drowning in debt. We're still married. Sarah, let's start over. You're doing well, right?" Mark pleaded. Before I could respond, Lily arrived home. "What's going on here?" she asked. Mark turned to her, his face softening. "Lily, you've grown so much. You look just like me. We're family." Lily's voice was firm. "No, we're not. Mom and I have been fine without you." Mark tried to argue, claiming we were still married, but Lily stopped him. "Mom filed for divorce years ago. You were legally declared dead after 7 years of no contact." Mark and Amy were stunned. "But that's impossible. You can't do that without my permission," Mark stammered. "Of course, she could. My stepdad, Tom, is a lawyer, and he handled everything," Lily said. Mark's face turned pale, desperate. He tried to defend himself. "I didn't mean for things to get this bad. Emily needed me." I smiled grimly. "Emily? Did you ever learn her last name?" Mark shook his head. "No, she said she didn't like sharing personal details. Her last name is Stone. She's married to your former boss, Mr. Stone." Mark's face drained of color as I explained. Emily had used him for years, while her husband remained unaware of her lavish spending, until recently. Mr. Stone had hired a private investigator, uncovering everything. Just then, Tom arrived home. "What's going on here, Mark? If you're here to cause trouble, leave now. This is private property." Defeated, Mark and Amy left. Not long after, Mark faced legal consequences for his actions. Mr. Stone divorced Emily, and their lives were shattered. As for me, I had finally achieved the life I always dreamed of. Lily had grown into a strong, independent woman, and I knew she would never settle for less than she deserved. Tom and I chose not to marry, finding happiness in our partnership without legal formalities. I had overcome every obstacle and emerged stronger, and I hoped Lily would always remember to chase her dreams and never let anyone hold her back.
Hi, I'm Michael Foster, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the biggest betrayals lead to the sweetest victories. You see, in business, just like in family, the person you trust the most can be the one plotting your downfall. But they often forget to check what's really beneath their feet before they push you off the cliff. Let me take you back to where it all began. Foster Technologies wasn't always the $100 million company it is today. 15 years ago, it was just a struggling consulting firm my father had built from scratch. Dad was brilliant with technology but terrible with business. By 2010, we were 3 months away from bankruptcy, and my father's health was failing under the stress. I was 25, fresh out of business school, while my older brother James was 30 and already a familiar face in the local nightlife scene. Dad had always favored James, the charming firstborn who could talk his way out of anything. But charm doesn't pay the bills, and James's party lifestyle had already cost the company several major clients. I still remember that rainy Tuesday when I found Dad slumped over his desk, tears in his eyes, looking at our latest financial reports. "It's over, Michael," he whispered, his voice broken. "Everything I built. I'm going to lose it all." Something in me snapped that day. I couldn't watch my father's dream die, even if he'd always seen me as second best. While James was out spending company money at exclusive clubs, I started working 18-hour days. I learned every aspect of the business, met with every client, reviewed every contract. Mom worried about me. "Michael, you need to rest," she'd say, bringing dinner to my office at midnight. "You can't save the company by yourself." But that's exactly what I did. The first year was brutal. I restructured our debt, cut unnecessary expenses, including James' entertainment budget, and personally visited every major client we'd lost. Many slammed their doors in my face, but I kept coming back. Persistence pays off. By the end of that year, we were breaking even. James found it hilarious. "Look at little Mikey playing businessman," he'd mock whenever he bothered to show up at the office. "Dad's still going to put me in charge, I'm the oldest." I ignored him and focused on work. Over the next 5 years, I transformed Foster Technologies from a simple IT consulting firm into a full-service digital transformation company. We developed proprietary software solutions, expanded into cloud services, and built a reputation for excellence in the industry. The company grew exponentially. From $2 million in revenue, we hit $10 million, then $50 million, and finally crossed the $100 million mark last year. Our staff grew from 20 to over 500. We opened offices in 3 countries. Dad's health improved as the company flourished, but his favoritism didn't change. Every success was somehow attributed to James's leadership, even though he spent most of his time planning his next vacation. In family dinners, Dad would praise James' business acumen while I sat quietly going through quarterly reports on my phone. I didn't care about the credit. I cared about the company, our employees, and the legacy we were building. Besides, I had my own plans. What nobody knew, not even my father, was that I'd been carefully documenting everything over the years. Every decision James sabotaged, every client he lost, every dollar he wasted. More importantly, I've been quietly building relationships with our key clients, making myself indispensable to their operations. I also had another secret, one that would turn out to be crucial. During the company's darkest days, when we were nearly bankrupt, I'd used my own savings and taken out personal loans to keep us afloat. In exchange, I'd received shares. Lots of shares. The paperwork was buried in mountains of corporate documentation. But I legally owned 40% of Foster Technologies. Or at least I thought that would be enough to protect me. I couldn't have been more wrong. Last month, everything changed. Dad announced his retirement and everyone expected him to name me as his successor. After all, I've been effectively running the company for years. Even James had been showing up to work more often, probably sensing the change coming. The shareholders' meeting was set for Friday afternoon. All major stakeholders were present, including our board members and key investors. I prepared a comprehensive presentation about our growth strategy for the next 5 years. Dad stood up to make his announcement. I noticed James smirking in his seat, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Ladies and gentlemen, Dad began, as you know, I'm retiring as CEO of Foster Technologies. This company has been my life's work, and choosing my successor was not an easy decision. He paused, looking around the room. But there's only one person who truly embodies the leadership qualities needed to take Foster Technologies to the next level. Someone who understands our family values and has the vision to lead us into the future. I sat straighter in my chair, ready to accept the responsibility I'd been preparing for all these years. My son, James Foster, will be taking over as CEO effective immediately. The room went silent. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. But Dad wasn't finished. Furthermore, James has brought to my attention some concerning irregularities in our recent operations. It seems that certain individuals have been making unauthorized decisions and potentially compromising our company's integrity. James stood up, holding a folder. I'm afraid my brother Michael has been operating outside his authority, making promises to clients we can't keep, and potentially engaging in unethical practices. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Every accusation was a twisted version of the truth. The very decisions that had saved and grown the company were being presented as reckless and unauthorized. Therefore, Dad continued, as my final act as CEO, I'm terminating Michael's employment with Foster Technologies, effective immediately. The security guards were already approaching my chair. James's voice dripped with fake sympathy. I'm sorry it had to end this way, little brother. But hey, maybe now you can get a life outside the office. The room erupted in whispers as I was escorted out, my key card deactivated, my access revoked. I could see the pity in some faces, the schadenfreude in others. But they had no idea what was coming. Because while James was plotting my downfall, he'd forgotten 3 crucial things. First, those unauthorized decisions were all properly documented and approved. Second, my 40% ownership stake wasn't as buried as they thought. And third, well, let's just say that when you spend 10 years building a company's technology infrastructure, you learn where all the bodies are buried, sometimes literally. As I walked to my car that evening, I pulled out my phone and sent a single text message to an old friend at the SEC. Then I went home and waited. Monday morning was going to be very, very interesting. Monday morning arrived with a thunderstorm, fitting weather for what was about to unfold. I sat in my home office, watching the clock tick towards 9 a.m. when James would be strutting into his new CEO office for the first time. The weekend had been interesting. Mom had called 17 times, leaving tearful voicemails about family unity. Dad hadn't called at all. James had been too busy celebrating at his favorite clubs. The photos were all over social media, including some questionable ones with the company credit card clearly visible on the table. I smiled, remembering how James always thought technology was beneath him. "That's geek stuff," he'd say, refusing to learn even basic cybersecurity protocols. Well, that arrogance was about to cost him dearly. At exactly 9:15 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, my loyal executive assistant who James hadn't bothered to fire. Probably because he thought she just brought coffee. "It's starting," her message read. I opened my laptop and connected to Foster Technologies' internal security feed. Yes, I still had access. When you build a system from the ground up, you always leave yourself a back door. The camera in the CEO's office showed James walking in, coffee in hand, ready to begin his reign. He sat in a leather chair, my chair, and pressed the power button on his computer. That's when the show began. Instead of the Windows login screen, a video started playing. It was security footage from 3 years ago, showing James in this very office making a deal with our biggest competitor to sell them our client data. The audio was crystal clear. "Of course I can get you their information," James's voice rang out. "My idiot brother does all the work anyway. Just make sure the payment goes to my Cayman account." James frantically tried to turn off the monitor, but nothing worked. The video kept playing on every screen in his office, but that was just the beginning. His phone buzzed. The SEC had received an anonymous tip about insider trading, complete with documented evidence of James' illegal activities over the past decade. His private email started pinging with notifications. Somehow, all his confidential communications had been leaked to the board members. Down in the lobby, federal agents were walking through the front door. I watched through the security feed as James's face turned from confusion to panic. He tried calling Dad, but Dad's phone was busy, probably because he was getting his own set of revelations about his beloved firstborn's activities. At 9:30 a.m., Sarah walked into James' office. "Mr. Foster," she said calmly, "the board members are requesting an emergency meeting. Also, there are some federal agents here to see you." James started sweating. "Tell them I'm busy. Cancel everything, and get it up here to fix these damn computers." Sarah smiled politely. "I'm afraid that won't be possible. You see, the entire department just resigned. They sent a company-wide email explaining why. Something about loyalty to the person who actually built this company." "What?" "They can't do that. We have contracts." Actually, Sarah placed a folder on his desk. "They can. Their contracts were with a subsidiary company that holds all our intellectual property rights. A company that, as of this morning, is no longer affiliated with Foster Technologies." James's hands shook as he opened the folder. Inside was a simple document showing the ownership structure of Foster Innovation Labs, the subsidiary I'd quietly created years ago. The company that actually owned all our patents, software, and client contracts. And I owned 100% of it. But the clients," James stammered, "have already been informed of the change in management. Most have already signed new contracts, directly with Foster Innovation Labs. It seems they prefer working with the person who actually handled their accounts all these years." The color drained from James's face as he finally understood. Every piece of technology that made Foster Technologies valuable, every client relationship that kept it profitable, every key employee who made it run. They were all loyal to me. He'd stolen an empty shell. The office door opened again. 2 FBI agents walked in, followed by Mr. Patterson, our chief legal counsel. "James Foster," one agent said, "we need to ask you some questions about certain financial transactions." "You can't do this," James shouted, looking wildly around the room. "I'm the CEO. I'm in charge here." Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. "Actually, about that." He pulled out another document. "The board just concluded an emergency meeting. Given the circumstances, they've voted to remove you as CEO, effective immediately." "They can't do that. You own shares in Foster Technologies," Mr. Patterson corrected. "A company that, as of 9 o'clock this morning, has no intellectual property, no major clients, and no core development team." I believe the stock price reflects that reality. James lunged for his computer, probably to check the stock ticker. But of course, his screen was still playing videos of his various illegal activities over the years. As James was escorted out of the building by federal agents, his designer suit wrinkled and his face ashen, I sent one final company-wide email from my remote access. To all remaining Foster Technologies employees, you have a choice. Stay with a sinking ship or join us at Foster Innovation Labs, where innovation and integrity actually mean something. Your jobs are secure, your benefits will be better, and most importantly, your hard work will be respected. Within an hour, 90% of the staff had accepted the offer. But my revenge wasn't complete yet. There was still the matter of dear old Dad's retirement fund. The fallout was spectacular. Within 24 hours, Foster Technologies stock had plummeted 70%. News of James' arrest made headlines in every major business publication. Tech CEO arrested on multiple fraud charges. Foster Technologies in freefall as scandal erupts. But I wasn't done yet. 3 days after James's arrest, I sat in my new office at Foster Innovation Labs headquarters, a modern building I'd secretly purchased 6 months ago. Sarah walked in with a familiar face. Dad's financial advisor, Mr. Goldman. He's been calling nonstop, Mr. Goldman said, looking uncomfortable. Ever since he realized that his retirement fund is worthless, I finished for him, because he invested everything in Foster Technologies stock. Dad had always bragged about having skin in the game, keeping his entire retirement portfolio in company shares. It was poor financial planning, but he'd never listened to advice about diversification. Now those shares were worth pennies on the dollar. Your father is desperate, Mr. Goldman continued. Mrs. Foster, your mother, she's worried they might lose the house. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about all the times Dad had dismissed my warnings about James's behavior. All the times he'd attributed my success to luck rather than hard work. Set up a meeting, I finally said. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., here. The next morning, my parents arrived at Foster Innovation Labs. Mom looked like she'd been crying. Dad looked like he aged 10 years in a week. They sat across from me in the visitor chairs, the same model as the ones Dad used to make me sit in while he lectured me about real leadership. Son, Dad began, his voice shaking. I know I made mistakes. Mistakes? I interrupted quietly. You let James destroy evidence of his crimes. You helped him embezzle company funds. You were complicit in fraud that hurt our employees, our clients, and our shareholders. I didn't know. He tried to protest. You knew. I cut him off. You just didn't care. Because James was your golden boy, and I was just the backup plan. Mom started crying softly. I handed her a tissue. But that's not why you're here, I continued. You're here because you're broke. Because the company shares that were supposed to fund your retirement are worthless. Dad slumped in his chair. Michael, please, we're family. Family? I smiled without humor. Was I family when you let James take credit for my work? Was I family when you fired me in front of the entire company? I pulled out a folder. I learned that dramatic revelations were more effective with proper documentation. Here's what's going to happen. Foster Innovation Labs will buy back your shares in Foster Technologies at their original purchase price. Their eyes widened with hope. But, I continued, there are conditions. First, you both sign a non-disclosure agreement about James' activities. Second, you retire, quietly, to that house in Florida you always talked about. Third, you stay out of my business. Completely. You do that for us, Mom whispered. Not for you, I corrected, for the scared 12-year-old boy who used to believe his father hung the moon. He deserved better than what you gave him. Dad started to speak, but I held up my hand. One more thing. The money comes with a trustee, someone who'll make sure you don't gamble it away on another one of James's schemes. Monthly allowance, investment restrictions, the whole package. You don't trust us, Dad said sadly. You taught me that lesson very well. They signed the papers. As security escorted them out, Dad turned back one last time. I was wrong about you, son. You're a better businessman than I ever was. No, Dad, I replied. I'm just better at remembering who my real enemies are. 5 years have passed since then. Foster Innovation Labs is now a billion-dollar company known for its cutting-edge technology and ethical business practices. James served 2 years in prison and now works as a bartender in Vegas. Dad and Mom live quietly in Florida, sending occasional postcards that I never answer. Last week, I received an invitation to speak at my old business school. The topic? The importance of integrity in family business. I accepted with a smile. After all, I have quite a story to tell. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building something so successful that they have to live with the knowledge that they bet on the wrong horse. And as for those who wonder how the quiet one, the careful one, the backup plan pulled off such a complete victory, well, let's just say that while the peacocks are busy showing off their feathers, the eagles are watching, waiting, and planning their next move. Because in business, just like in life, it's not about who starts at the top. It's about who's still standing when the dust settles. Hi, I'm David Chen, and this is the story of how I turned from being the family disappointment to the person who saved our entire family's legacy. But let me start from the beginning, because sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding all the cards. 7 years ago, I joined Chen Global Technologies, our family's company, as a junior IT technician. While my cousins Michael and Lisa worked in executive offices with floor-to-ceiling windows, I chose to work in the basement, surrounded by servers and the gentle hum of cooling fans. Not that I had much choice, it was the only position my Uncle Robert, the CEO, would offer his underachieving nephew. David, you need to understand, Uncle Robert had said during my initial interview, his voice carrying that familiar disappointed tone I'd heard throughout my childhood. We're only offering you this position because your father insisted. Try not to mess it up. I still remember nodding quietly, accepting the position while my cousins smirked from their corner offices. What they didn't know was that I had already turned down offers from Google and Microsoft. I had my reasons for choosing our family company, reasons that would only become clear years later. The first few years were a study in endurance. While my cousins drove luxury cars and attended executive lunches, I spent my days maintaining our company's digital infrastructure. Every morning, I arrived an hour early to run system diagnostics. Every night, I was the last to leave, ensuring our networks were secure. Still playing with computers, David? Michael would joke whenever we crossed paths in the hallway. When are you going to get a real job like the rest of us? Lisa was no better. Oh, cousin, you should really dress better, she'd say, eyeing my practical clothing with disdain. No wonder Aunt May keeps trying to set you up with girls. No one would date an 8 guy voluntarily. But while they were busy mocking me, I was learning. Every system, every network, every piece of data that flowed through our company passed through my department. I knew every contract, every client relationship, every trade secret. Not because I was snooping. I would never breach that trust. But because I was the one building and maintaining the systems that protected this information. The real turning point came 3 years ago, when I noticed some concerning patterns in our network traffic. Late-night data transfers, unauthorized access attempts, and strange communication patterns with our overseas offices. I spent months quietly investigating, documenting everything, and building stronger security protocols. That's when I received the first email from James Morrison, CEO of Morrison Technologies, our biggest competitor. Mr. Chen, the email read, "Your recent security upgrades to your company's networks have impressed us. Would you be interested in discussing a position with our organization? The compensation would be significant." I declined politely, but kept the email, just like I kept every other offer that came my way over the years. Microsoft, Amazon, Apple. They all reached out eventually. It turns out that quietly revolutionizing a company's cybersecurity infrastructure gets noticed, even if your own family doesn't see it. Then came last week's annual company meeting. I sat in my usual spot at the back of the conference room, laptop open, monitoring our systems as always. The meeting was going as it usually did. Quarterly reports, growth projections, the usual corporate speak, until Michael stood up with his trademark smug smile. "I have an announcement to make," he said, straightening his expensive tie. "As head of operations, I've been reviewing our departmental efficiencies. I'm pleased to announce that we'll be outsourcing our 8 department to streamline operations. My brother-in-law's company will be taking over all 8 functions effective next month." The room erupted in murmurs. I saw Lisa trying to hide her gleeful smile behind her hand. Uncle Robert nodded approvingly from his seat at the head of the table. "It's time we modernize," Michael continued, looking directly at me. "We can't keep hanging on to outdated solutions just because of family obligations. That's when my laptop pinged, a new email from Morrison Technologies. But this one wasn't a job offer. This one would change everything. I looked up from my screen, a small smile playing on my lips. Before we vote on that proposal, I said quietly, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent room, I think there's something the board needs to see. And that's when I started the presentation that would make our entire family realize exactly who they've been mocking all these years. The conference room screen flickered to life as I connected my laptop. Michael's confident smirk wavered slightly. He'd never seen me speak up in a meeting before. David. Uncle Robert's voice carried a warning tone. We've already decided. One moment, Uncle, I interrupted softly, pulling up the first email. I received this message from James Morrison 10 minutes ago. I think everyone should hear what our biggest competitor has to say. The room fell silent as I projected the email onto the screen. David, our surveillance indicates that Cheng Global is planning to outsource its IT department. Before you proceed with any transitions, I feel obligated to warn you about Maxwell Solutions, your proposed new IT provider. They've been compromised. The ransomware attack that crippled Stanford Industries last month, that was through Maxwell. There's a security breach waiting to happen. As a professional courtesy, given our past discussions, I wanted you to know. Regards, James Morrison, CEO, Morrison Technologies. Michael's face had lost some of its color. This is ridiculous, he sputtered. You're making this up. Maxwell Solutions has an excellent reputation. I clicked to the next slide, displaying a series of network traces and security logs. These are the attack patterns from the Stanford Industries breach, I explained, my voice remaining calm. And these, I switched to another screen, are the current network patterns from Maxwell Solutions. The signature matches. They're already compromised. Lisa stood up, her designer heels clicking against the floor. This is just David trying to save his job. He's always been jealous of our success. Actually, I interrupted, pulling up another document. I haven't been just anything for quite some time. I displayed a series of emails from tech giants, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, all with 7-figure job offers. I've turned down 37 high-level positions in the past 5 years. But that's not important right now. I switched to another screen, showing a complex network diagram. What is important is that over the past 7 years, I've built a proprietary security system that protects not just our data, but our entire business operation. It's why we've never had a successful cyber attack, while our competitors have lost millions to breaches. Uncle Robert leaned forward, his expression changing from dismissive to concerned. What exactly are you saying, David? I took a deep breath. This was the moment I'd been preparing for. 3 things. First, Maxwell Solutions is compromised, and if we outsource to them, we'll lose everything within 6 months. Second, our current security system, the one I built, is worth approximately $300 million on the open market. Morrison Technologies offered to buy it last year. The room erupted in chaos. $300 million? Even Michael looked shocked. And third, I continued, my voice cutting through the noise. I discovered something else while building these systems. Something about what really happened to those missing funds from the pension account 5 years ago. Michael's face went from pale to ghost white. Lisa dropped her phone. Uncle Robert gripped the arms of his chair so hard his knuckles turned white. You see, I continued, pulling up another series of documents. When you build the security systems, you see everything. Every transaction, every deleted email, every hidden account. I never went looking for this information, but as the system administrator, it was my job to protect it. I clicked to the next slide, showing a series of transaction records. 5 years ago, $50 million disappeared from our employee pension fund. The official story was that it was lost in a bad investment. The truth is, and that's when the real bombshells started dropping, one by one, revealing secrets that would tear apart the carefully constructed lies my family had built their success upon. The conference room had gone deathly quiet as I displayed the transaction records on the screen. Every transfer, every hidden account, every falsified document, all meticulously organized and annotated. On March 15, 2019, I continued, my voice steady. Exactly $50 million was transferred from the pension fund through a series of shell companies. The money was eventually split 3 ways. I clicked through the slides. $20 million to an account in the Cayman Islands under the name Chen Ventures. That's you, Michael. $20 million to Lisa Chen International in Switzerland, and $10 million to a holding company controlled by Uncle Robert. Michael jumped to his feet, his expensive suit wrinkled from his tight grip on the conference table. You had no right to access those records. This is corporate espionage. I smiled slightly. Actually, as the head of its security, it was literally my job to monitor and protect all company transactions. Every action I took was within my legal authority and documented accordingly. Uncle Robert raised his hand, attempting to regain control of the situation. David, whatever you think you found, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. Like the explanation you gave the employees who lost their retirement savings? I interrupted, bringing up the next document. Or the explanation you gave the SEC when they investigated? The one where you blamed it all on a non-existent trader named Marcus Williams. Lisa's perfectly manicured nails drummed nervously on the table. What do you want, David? Money? A promotion? Name your price. I shook my head. This isn't about money. It's about responsibility. For 7 years, I've watched you treat this company like your personal piggy bank while hard-working employees lost their life savings. I've watched you mock and belittle everyone you considered beneath you, including me. But most importantly, I've watched you destroy everything Grandfather Chen built. I clicked to the next slide, showing our grandfather's original company mission statement. Grandfather started this company with a vision of technological innovation that would help people. He believed in creating value, not just profit. He believed in taking care of employees, not stealing from them. The room was silent as the weight of their actions finally seemed to sink in. But I wasn't finished. So here's what's going to happen, I said, pulling up a new document. First, the pension fund will be fully restored with interest. I already prepared the transfer documents. Second, all 3 of you will resign from your positions, effective immediately. The board will appoint new leadership based on merit, not family connections. You can't do this, Michael shouted, his face red with rage. You're nothing. Just an 8 guy. I clicked to the final slide, displaying my own stock holdings. Actually, I can. Over the past 7 years, while you were busy buying sports cars and vacation homes with stolen money, I was buying company stock. Every bonus, every raise, every consulting fee I earned on the side, all of it went into building my ownership stake. As of last week, I own 30% of Cheng Global Technologies. The color drained from Uncle Robert's face. That's impossible. The family trust controls the majority of shares. The family trust that requires all beneficiaries to be employed by the company, I asked innocently. The same trust that automatically transfers shares to the next largest shareholder if a beneficiary is found guilty of criminal conduct against the company. I let that sink in before delivering the final blow. I've already submitted all evidence of the pension fund theft to the SEC. They're very interested in speaking with all of you. So here are your options. And that's when I laid out the choice that would determine not just their fate, but the future of our entire family legacy. Option 1. I said, opening a folder on my laptop, you resign immediately, return every penny of the stolen money with interest, and accept positions as silent shareholders with no operational control. You'll still receive dividends, but you'll have no say in company decisions. I paused, letting the first option sink in before continuing. Option 2. I send this evidence to the SEC, the FBI, and every major news outlet. The company might survive the scandal, but you 3 definitely won't. Prison time for financial fraud isn't pleasant, especially for former executives. Michael lunged forward, his expensive watch glinting under the fluorescent lights. You ungrateful little. I wouldn't finish that sentence. I interrupted calmly. The company-wide security system I built includes audio and video recording in all conference rooms. Everything that's happened in the last hour is already safely backed up in multiple secure locations. Lisa, always the pragmatist, spoke up. How do we know you won't turn us in any way after we resign? I pulled up another document. Because I've prepared a legal agreement. If you comply with option 1, including full restitution, I'll sign a non-disclosure agreement. The employees get their money back. The company continues under new leadership, and our family's reputation remains intact. Everyone wins. Uncle Robert, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. And if we refuse both options? I clicked to my final slide, a pre-written press release detailing the entire scandal. Then at 5 p.m. today, this goes to every major news outlet. By tomorrow morning, Chen Global Technologies will be the biggest corporate scandal since Enron, and you'll all be facing federal charges. The room fell silent as the weight of their situation sank in. Through the glass walls, I could see employees going about their daily work, unaware that their futures hung in the balance of this moment. Finally, Uncle Robert sighed heavily. "You planned this all along, didn't you? Every detail, every move." I shook my head. "No, Uncle. I came here 7 years ago, hoping to learn the family business and make you proud. The planning only started when I discovered the theft. Even then, I kept hoping you'd make it right on your own." Michael slumped in his chair, his earlier bravado completely deflated. "What about my brother-in-law's company? The outsourcing deal?" "Already taken care of," I replied. I sent Morrison Technologies warning about Maxwell Solutions to their other clients. "They're finished. Your brother-in-law should focus on finding a good lawyer." Lisa's perfectly composed facade finally cracked. "All this time, we thought you were just the family failure, the quiet one in the basement." "That was your mistake," I said softly. "You were so busy looking down on me that you never bothered to look at what I was actually doing." Over the next hour, lawyers were called, documents were signed, and resignations were tendered. By sunset, Chen Global Technologies had a new leadership structure, and $50 million was on its way back to the pension fund. As I sat in my new office, not that I planned to spend much time there, Mom came to see me. Her eyes were red from crying. "Did you have to do it this way?" she asked quietly. I showed her the pension fund records. "They stole the retirement savings of people who work here for decades, Mom. People like Mr. Zhang, who's worked in maintenance since before I was born. Mrs. Liu in accounting, who put 3 kids through college on her salary here. They trusted us." She nodded slowly, understanding but sad. "What happens now?" I showed her my plans for the company, expanding our technology services, increasing employee benefits, establishing a charitable foundation for technology education. Now we rebuild, not just the company, but our family's reputation. We do it right this time. Over the next year, Chen Global Technologies underwent a transformation. Under new leadership, we doubled our market share and tripled our employee satisfaction ratings. Michael found a position with a small startup, humble but hopefully wiser. Lisa opened a boutique consulting firm, finally working for her success instead of stealing it. Uncle Robert retired, spending his days trying to rebuild relationships with the family he had nearly destroyed. As for me, I still come to work early and leave late, but now it's because I love what we're building. Our company has returned to Grandfather Chen's original vision, using technology to help people while taking care of our employees. Sometimes, late at night in my office, I look at the old family photos on my wall and feel a twinge of sadness for what we lost. But then I remember the faces of our employees when we announced the return of their pension funds, the tears of joy and relief, and I know I made the right choice. Last week, I received an invitation to speak at a technology conference. The topic? Ethical leadership in the digital age. I accepted with a small smile, already planning my speech. After all, I have quite a story to tell. The company continues to thrive, but more importantly, we've restored our family's honor. Sometimes the quietest person in the room isn't just the smartest. They're the one with the strength to do what's right, no matter the personal cost. They say success is the best revenge, but I've learned that true success isn't about revenge at all. It's about responsibility, to your employees, to your family's legacy, and to yourself. In the end, the Just 8 guy turned out to be exactly who the company needed. And as I write this from my office, watching the sun set over the city, I'm reminded of something Grandfather Chen used to say. Honor in business is not just about making money, but about making a difference. I think he would be proud of what we've become. The company's future is bright, built on a foundation of integrity rather than deception. And that's a legacy worth protecting. The crystal glasses clinked against fine china as Sarah Thompson, my sister, hosted another one of her elite family dinners. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, watching my brother-in-law Marcus, the self-proclaimed business genius, hold court with his usual audience of admirers. At 42, he wore his CEO status like a crown, each word dripping with the kind of confidence that only came from never having faced real failure. And that's how I closed the Anderson merger. he concluded, basking in the appreciative murmurs from our gathered family. Biggest deal of the quarter. Some people just understand business at a different level. His eyes flickered to me, lips curling into what my sister probably thought was a charming smile. I took another sip of wine, already knowing what was coming. These monthly family dinners had become Marcus's favorite stage for his particular brand of subtle cruelty. Speaking of business, he turned fully towards me now. Claire, how's that little, what do you call it, consulting thing of yours? It's going well, I replied evenly, noting how my sister Sarah straightened in her chair, eager for the show to begin. At 38, I learned that the best defense against Marcus's barbs was calm dignity. Still working from home, right? He chuckled, swirling his expensive bourbon. You know, when Sarah told me her sister was in business too, I expected something more professional. How can anyone take you seriously without even a proper office? My mother shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Dad suddenly found his roasted vegetables fascinating. They'd long ago chosen their side in the family dynamic, and it wasn't mine. My clients seem satisfied, I said, spearing a piece of perfectly cooked salmon. Marcus had insisted on catering from the city's most expensive restaurant, another chance to display his wealth. Clients? Marcus barked out of a laugh. Is that what we're calling the local coffee shops and boutiques now? You know, Claire, if you ever want real business advice. Actually, a deep voice cut through the dining room. Our client list is quite impressive. All heads turned to Richard Anderson. Yes, that Anderson, of the merger Marcus had just been bragging about. He'd been quietly observing from the other end of the table, where Marcus had seated him as the guest of honor. In fact, Anderson continued, setting down his fork, my daughter's company has been trying to get on her waiting list for months. Claire's firm is rather selective about who they take on. The silence that fell over the table was absolute. I could hear Sarah's sharp intake of breath, see Marcus's face transition from confidence to confusion. Your daughter's company, Marcus managed, his voice suddenly less certain. Megan Anderson, CEO of Horizon Tech. Richard smiled warmly in my direction. Claire's firm handled the Matthews Group acquisition last year. Brilliant strategy, by the way. When Megan told me who was behind it, I could hardly believe someone so young had orchestrated such a complex deal. But then, real talent doesn't need corner offices to prove itself, does it? I watched the color drain from Marcus's face as realization dawned. The Matthews acquisition had been the talk of the business world, a $400 million deal that had transformed the tech landscape, and I'd orchestrated it from my home office, the one he'd been mocking moments before. I had no idea, Marcus stammered, his earlier bravado evaporating. Obviously, I replied softly, allowing myself a small smile. More wine, anyone? Sarah's hand shook as she gripped her glass, her perfect hostess composure cracking. Our mother's mouth had fallen open slightly, and Dad was now staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. Claire, Marcus started, his tone shifting to something almost ingratiating. Why did you ever mention that I handle major corporate acquisitions, that my little consulting thing advises Fortune 500 companies? I set down my wine glass carefully. You never asked, Marcus. You were too busy telling everyone how successful you are. Richard Anderson chuckled. And speaking of success, Claire, I hope you'll consider taking Horizon Tech on as a client. Megan's been quite persistent about wanting to work with you. Of course, Marcus jumped in. Anything for family. I'm sure Claire would be happy to. I'm afraid my schedule is quite full, I interrupted smoothly. But Mr. Anderson, please tell Megan to have her team send over the proposal. I'll review it personally. Marcus's face flushed red. The Anderson merger he'd been bragging about minutes ago, his biggest deal of the quarter, was worth less than half of what I handled for Matthews. And now his direct line to Richard Anderson was watching me with obvious respect while barely acknowledging Marcus's presence. Claire, Sarah found her voice, though it trembled slightly. Why didn't you tell us? All these years. Tell you what, Sarah. That while you and Marcus were mocking my little business, I was building one of the most respected consulting firms in the industry. That the home office you love to ridicule has closed deals worth billions? I dabbed my lips with the linen napkin. Would you have believed me? Or would you have just found new ways to diminish my success? The truth hung heavy in the air. They wouldn't have believed me. They've been too invested in their narrative of Marcus as the family's business genius and me as the struggling younger sister who couldn't quite measure up. But your clothes. Sarah gestured weakly at my simple black dress. Your car, you live in that small house. Because I don't need to prove anything to anyone, I replied. Success speaks for itself. It doesn't need designer labels or luxury cars to be real. Richard Anderson nodded approvingly. That's precisely why your reputation in the industry is so sterling, Claire. No flash, all substance. The exact opposite of. His eyes flickered to Marcus briefly. Certain other approaches. Marcus's hand tightened around his bourbon glass. His carefully cultivated image of business brilliance was crumbling, and with it his standing in the family. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. Mr. Anderson, I turned to Richard, ignoring Marcus's attempts to catch my eye. I'd love to hear more about Horizon Tech's expansion plans. Perhaps over dinner next week. I know a wonderful little place. The new French restaurant on Fifth. Marcus interjected desperately. I'm a member there. I cold. Actually, I smiled. I own it. One of my small side investments. Nothing like running a major corporation, of course, but it turns a nice profit. The restaurant Marcus had been trying to get a membership to for months. The one he bragged about finally getting into. He'd never known that every time he dined there, he'd been in my establishment. Sarah's wine glass slipped from her fingers, staining the pristine tablecloth red. But for once she didn't rush to clean it up. She was too busy staring at me, really seeing me for the first time in years. The thing about success, I continued, standing up from the table, is that it doesn't need an audience to be real. While you were all focused on Marcus's latest promotion or Sarah's country club membership, I was building something lasting, something real. I reached for my simple leather handbag, not designer, but handmade by an artisan I'd helped start their business. Thank you for dinner, Sarah. Mr. Anderson, I'll have my office contact you about that dinner next week. As I walked toward the door, I heard Marcus's strained voice. Claire, wait, perhaps we should discuss. Discuss what? I turned back briefly. How you spent years mocking my business? How you treated me like a failure because I didn't brag about my success? Or maybe how you're suddenly interested in my little consulting thing now that you know who my clients are. The silence was deafening. Sarah had sunk back in her chair, her perfect dinner party in ruins. Our parents were looking anywhere but at me. And Marcus looked like a man watching his carefully constructed world crumble. Send me the dinner bill, Sarah, I called over my shoulder. I know how Marcus hates to spend money on family charity cases. The door closed behind me with a satisfying click, leaving them to digest not just their expensive catered meal, but the realization that they'd spent years underestimating exactly the wrong person. And this was just the beginning, because what they didn't know, what Marcus was about to find out, was that his company's upcoming merger, the one he'd been counting on to secure his position as CEO, was about to face an unexpected complication. One that had everything to do with the sister-in-law he dismissed for so long. The morning after the dinner party, my phone exploded with notifications. Text messages from Sarah, voicemails from Marcus, even emails from my parents, all suddenly desperate to clear up any misunderstandings. I smiled, remembering Marcus's face when Richard Anderson had revealed who I really was. But I wasn't interested in their belated attempts at reconciliation. I had a merger to stop. You see, what Marcus didn't know, what he'd been too arrogant to investigate, was that his company's upcoming merger wasn't just another deal. It was a carefully orchestrated plan, one I'd been developing for months. Claire, my assistant's voice came through the intercom of my home office. Yes, the same one Marcus had mocked. Mr. Anderson is on line 1. I picked up the phone, settling into my ergonomic chair. My little home office might not have impressed Marcus, but its technology rivaled any corporate headquarters. Richard, good morning. Claire, his warm voice filled the line. I must say, dinner last night was enlightening. Your brother-in-law seems to be having quite the morning. He's been trying to reach me since dawn. I could imagine. Marcus's entire career hinged on this merger, the one he thought would cement his position as CEO. The one he'd been bragging about at every family gathering for months. Has he figured it out yet? I asked, pulling up the merger documents on my triple monitors. Not yet, Richard chuckled, though he might want to take a closer look at who's been quietly buying shares in his company over the past 6 months. Ah, yes, the investment firm that had been accumulating a significant stake in Marcus's company, the one operating through a series of shell companies, the one that through a complex web of corporations belonged to me. Claire. Sarah's name flashed on my phone again. I declined the call. Your sister seems persistent, Richard observed. They all are, now that they know. I signed off on another document, watching as my ownership percentage ticked up another fraction. Amazing how success changes people's perspective. The next few days were a symphony of panic from Marcus's corner. He finally started digging into the merger details, probably hoping to impress me with his business acumen. Instead, he discovered something terrifying. His company was being systematically purchased by an unknown entity. You have to help me. He cornered me outside my favorite coffee shop, not coincidentally, one of my first consulting clients. Claire, whatever bad blood there is between us, this is my career we're talking about. I took a sip of my artisanal latte. Funny, I thought it was just a little coffee shop last month when you mocked me for helping them expand. I was wrong, okay. He ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up in a way Sarah would have hated. I was arrogant and stupid, but please, if this merger falls through, then what, Marcus? You'll have to work your way up like everyone else. Start something from scratch. Build a business without writing on your family name. His face paled. We both knew he'd never built anything himself. His CEO position had come through connections, not competence. The same connections he used to belittle me at every opportunity. My phone buzzed again. A notification from my legal team. Another block of shares acquired. We were getting close. The board meeting is next week, Marcus said desperately. They're expecting me to present the merger details. But this unknown buyer, if they gain controlling interest, then you'd be answerable to them. I finished for him. Imagine that. The great Marcus Thompson having to justify his business decisions to someone else. The realization dawned in his eyes slowly. Claire, the buyer, it's not. My phone buzzed again. A text from Richard Anderson. Megan's team just sent over the Horizon Tech proposal. Impressive plans. Shame about Marcus's company. They would have made a good partner if their leadership was different. I showed Marcus the text, watched as the last pieces clicked into place. You're going to destroy everything I've built, he whispered. No, Marcus. I'm going to show you what real business looks like. I stood up, smoothing my simple but immaculately tailored dress. The board meeting is at 2 p.m. next Thursday, correct? Don't worry about preparing anything. I'll be handling the presentation. The week that followed was chaos. Sarah showed up at my house twice, begging me to reconsider. He's family, she pleaded, as if she hadn't spent years treating me like an embarrassment. My parents tried next. Think about what this will do to the family name. Dad argued. The same family name that hadn't stopped them from laughing at Marcus's jokes about my cute little business. But the real satisfaction came at the board meeting. I walked into the room Marcus had dominated for so long, taking my seat at the head of the table. The other board members, old men who'd never questioned Marcus's leadership, stared in confusion. Gentlemen, I began, as Marcus slumped in his chair. I represent Quantum Ventures, the investment firm that now holds a controlling interest in this company. We've reviewed the proposed merger extensively, and we have some concerns about the current leadership strategy. For the next hour, I methodically laid out every mistake Marcus had made, every rushed decision, every missed opportunity, every instance where he chosen flash over substance. The board members' expressions shifted from confusion to concern to outright alarm. Therefore, I concluded, our first act as majority shareholder will be to recommend new leadership. Someone who understands that real business success isn't about corner offices or country club memberships. It's about solid strategy, careful planning, and actual results. Marcus stood up, his face red. You can't do this. I built this company. Did you? I pulled out a folder. Because our analysis shows that company value has actually decreased under your leadership. The only thing keeping your position secure was this merger, a merger that as of this morning is no longer happening. The board erupted in chaos. Marcus tried to speak, but his voice was drowned out by angry shareholders demanding explanations. I sat quietly, watching years of his carefully constructed facade crumble. Oh, and Marcus, I added as he headed for the door, his career in shambles. You might want to start looking for a new country club membership. The one you have is about to be discontinued. The aftermath was everything I'd planned for. Marcus was forced to resign, his reputation in tatters. Sarah's social circle, the one she used to mock my simple lifestyle, suddenly discovered that the sister they dismissed was now controlling one of the city's largest companies. My parents called a family meeting, probably hoping to salvage something from the wreckage. I attended out of curiosity. You've made your point, Mom said, her voice trembling. Surely we can fix this as a family. I looked around the table. Marcus, without his designer suit and corporate swagger. Sarah, her perfect image tarnished by association. My parents finally forced to acknowledge that their golden couple wasn't so golden after all. Fix what? I asked calmly. I simply did business. Isn't that what Marcus always wanted? For me to understand real business. But it's destroyed him, Sarah protested. His career, his reputation. No, I corrected her. His arrogance destroyed him. His need to diminish others to feel important. I just showed everyone what was already there. I stood up, gathering my things. The company will do better under new leadership. The shareholders will be happier, and Marcus, well, I hear there's good money in running a home-based business. If you can handle working without a proper office, that is. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. 5 years later, the company had doubled in value under new leadership. I'd merged it with Horizon Tech, creating one of the largest tech consultancies in the country. Marcus had tried starting his own firm, but without his corporate title and family connections, he discovered that business success required more than a corner office and an expensive suit. Sarah still hosted family dinners, though they were considerably less grand now. Sometimes, when I attended, I'd catch Marcus staring at my simple clothes and modest lifestyle with new understanding. He finally learned what I'd known all along: real success doesn't need to announce itself. The small home office where I built my empire remained unchanged, but now, on its wall, hung a framed photo from that last board meeting. Marcus's face, as he realized that the sister-in-law he dismissed had orchestrated his downfall, was a masterpiece of karmic justice. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't just success. It's success they never saw coming. As for me, I still prefer working from home, still drive my reliable car, still live in my comfortable but modest house. But now, when Marcus passes me in his much-reduced circumstances, he understands a fundamental truth. True power isn't in what you show, it's in what you know. And I'd known, all along, exactly what I was building. The night shift at Metropolitan General was always challenging, but this one would change everything. I was just finishing my rounds when they brought him in, an elderly man, unconscious, wearing tattered clothes, and carrying no ID. Another homeless case. Dr. Richards sighed, barely glancing at the patient. Put him in the hallway until we clear a non-priority bed. But something about the man's face seemed familiar. Despite his ragged appearance, his hands showed signs of recent professional care. And the way he was clutching a worn leather notebook. I'll take him to room 712. I decided. It was technically reserved for VIP patients, but it had been empty for weeks. Are you insane, Sarah? Amy, the charge nurse whispered. If Dr. Harrison finds out you put a homeless man in a VIP suite. Dr. Victoria Harrison wasn't just any hospital administrator. She was the CEO who turned Metropolitan General from a caring community hospital into a profit-focused corporation. Under her leadership, non-priority patients were often left waiting for hours. Everyone deserves proper care, I replied, remembering my own father's last days in a hospital hallway. Help me move him. As we transferred the mystery patient, his notebook fell open. I caught a glimpse of complex medical diagrams before quickly closing it. Something wasn't adding up. I spent my entire shift monitoring him, neglecting the paperwork Dr. Harrison always insisted was more important than excessive patient attention. His vitals were stable but concerning. Every instinct told me this man needed careful observation. At 6 a.m., Dr. Harrison's clicking heels announced her early morning inspection. She stopped dead when she saw our hallway empty of waiting patients. Where are the overflow cases? She demanded. Room 712, I answered honestly. I assessed the situation and... You put someone in a VIP suite without authorization. Her perfectly painted lips curled in disgust. Who? John Doe case, approximately 70 years old, brought in at 2 a.m. with a homeless man. She cut me off. In my VIP wing, she stormed into room 712, taking in the scene with growing fury. Are you deliberately trying to destroy this hospital's reputation? He needs proper care. I stood my ground. His symptoms indicate. Your job isn't to think, she snapped. It's to follow protocols, and protocol says non-paying patients wait in the hallway. That's not healthcare, I protested. It's not what Metropolitan General used to stand for. Used to? She laughed coldly. You mean before I turned this failing hospital into a profitable enterprise? Clear this room immediately and consider yourself terminated. You can't fire her for providing care, Amy spoke up. I can fire her for misuse of hospital resources, Dr. Harrison smiled. Security, please escort Nurse Chen out of the building. And move this person to the hallway where he belongs. As security approached, the patient's heart monitor began beeping erratically. I rushed to his side, professional instincts taking over. Step away from him, Dr. Harrison ordered. You're no longer employed here. That's when the patient's eyes opened. He looked straight at me, then at Dr. Harrison, and spoke in a clear, educated voice. Actually, she works for me. We all do. Dr. Harrison froze. What? Thomas Chen, he said calmly, despite the monitor's warnings. Majority shareholder of Metropolitan General Hospital, and I believe we need to discuss how you've been running my father's legacy. The security guards stepped back. Dr. Harrison's face went from angry red to ghostly white. Because everyone in healthcare knew the Chen name, the family that had built Metropolitan General from a small clinic into a major hospital before mysteriously disappearing 15 years ago. But as Dr. Harrison stammered excuses, I noticed something alarming on the monitors. Mr. Chen's stable condition was rapidly deteriorating, and his next words confirmed my worst fears. Sarah, I'm afraid I've been poisoned. Code blue, I shouted, already moving to action as Mr. Chen's vitals plummeted. Amy, get me a toxicology kit. Dr. Harrison stood frozen, her perfect composure cracking. Stop, you're not employed here anymore. You can't. Either help or get out of my way, I snapped, starting emergency protocols. Years of ER experience took over as I worked to stabilize him. Mr. Chen grabbed my hand weakly. The notebook, he whispered. Don't let her. But Dr. Harrison had already snatched the worn leather journal from the bedside table. As she flipped through it, her face shifted from confusion to shock to something darker. Security, she said quietly, clear the room. No one comes in or out without my authorization. That man needs immediate care. I protested. Oh, we'll get care, she smiled coldly. The best care money can buy. Just not from you. She held up the notebook. Did you really think we wouldn't figure it out? Thomas, that your little undercover investigation wouldn't be noticed. The security guards looked uncertain. Dr. Harrison, he needs medical attention. What he needs, she cut them off, is to understand that some things should stay buried. Like what really happened to his father 15 years ago. Mr. Chen's monitors were screaming now. But as I moved to help him, one of the security guards grabbed my arm. Not the hospital's regular security. This man wore an earpiece I'd never seen before. The poison, Mr. Chen managed between gasps. It wasn't just me. Check the general supply. Horror dawned as I understood. I've been noticing increased complications in routine cases over the past month. Small things, patients taking longer to recover, unexpected reactions to standard medications. You've been tampering with the hospital's medical supplies, I accused Dr. Harrison. That's why you changed suppliers last month. That's why you've been restricting access to the pharmacy records. She laughed, a harsh, unfamiliar sound. Tampering? I've been correcting a mistake. This hospital was supposed to be mine. Richard Chen promised it to me before his mysterious accident, but he left everything to his idealistic son instead. So you've been slowly poisoning patients, I said in disbelief, making the hospital look incompetent under the Chen family's ownership. Forcing them to sell, she finished smugly. The board meets tomorrow to discuss the hospital's future. Once they see the mortality rates, the malpractice risks. She patted Mr. Chen's hand almost gently. Don't worry, your death will be attributed to your homeless lifestyle. Such a tragic end to the Chen legacy. But she'd forgotten something crucial about emergency rooms. We never work alone. And while she'd been focused on me, Amy had slipped out during the chaos. The room's speaker crackled to life. Code black in progress. All personnel implement Protocol 17 immediately. Dr. Harrison's face went pale. No, that's impossible. That protocol was deleted years ago, was it? Mr. Chen's voice was weak but clear. Or did you just think it was? The light suddenly shifted to ultraviolet, revealing something shocking on Dr. Harrison's hands and clothes, traces of the very poison she'd been using glowing in unmistakable blue under the specialized light. But as security moved to detain her, she pulled out a syringe. Nobody move. One step and he gets the full dose. What she didn't notice was the slight smile on Mr. Chen's face, or the fact that his deteriorating vital signs had suddenly stabilized. Interesting syringe, Dr. Harrison, Mr. Chen said, suddenly sounding much stronger. But I believe you'll find it's filled with saline. Dr. Harrison stared at the syringe in her hand, then at the monitors showing Mr. Chen's stabilizing vitals. Impossible, she whispered. The poison was neutralized about 20 minutes ago, I explained, finally understanding. When I accidentally knocked over your coffee during the code blue. The antidote was in my ID badge dispenser, standard issue for all employees under Protocol 17. A protocol you thought you'd erased, Mr. Chen added, sitting up straighter. Just like you thought you'd erase all traces of what happened to my father 15 years ago. The ultraviolet lights continued to reveal damning evidence, glowing traces of various compounds on Dr. Harrison's clothes, hands, and even her designer handbag. You don't understand, she said desperately. Your father was going to ruin everything. His healthcare for all policy was bankrupting us. When he refused to change course. You arranged his accident, Mr. Chen finished. But you made one crucial mistake. Amy returned with a team of FBI agents, led by a familiar face. Dr. Richards, the dismissive doctor from earlier. Agent Sarah Chen, my supposed colleague, introduced herself. FBI Healthcare Fraud Division. We've been building this case for months. Dr. Harrison's composure finally shattered completely. The whole thing was a setup. Not exactly, Mr. Chen explained. We knew someone was poisoning patients, but we didn't know who. My homeless admission was a calculated risk to draw out the perpetrator. But Sarah, Dr. Harrison looked at me with dawning horror. She's just a nurse. Is she? Mr. Chen smiled. Or is she the person who first noticed the pattern of complications? The one who started documenting everything in that notebook you're holding? Which, by the way, is transmitting everything you've said to the FBI? The notebook in her hand suddenly beeped, its hidden camera capturing her expression as she realized the full scope of the trap. But as agents moved to arrest her, Dr. Harrison pressed a button on her phone. If I'm going down, I'm taking this whole hospital with me. Alarm systems began blaring throughout the building. On the security monitors, we could see emergency doors sealing themselves, trapping patients and staff inside. Dead man's switch, she laughed hysterically. In 15 minutes, every compromised medication in this hospital will be automatically administered through the electronic dispensing system. Hundreds of patients. Unless what? Agent Chen demanded. Unless the Chen family signs over the hospital, completely and permanently. Mr. Chen looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. Because what Dr. Harrison didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had one more secret of my own. Actually, I said quietly, removing my nurse's ID badge, the Chen family has already signed over the hospital. I pulled out another badge from my scrubs pocket, one that made Dr. Harrison's eyes go wide. Sarah Chen, MD, PhD, Chief Executive Officer, Metropolitan Health Systems. No, Dr. Harrison breathed. That's impossible. Not impossible, Mr. Chen smiled. Inevitable. You see, Sarah isn't just any nurse. She's my daughter, and more importantly, she's Richard Chen's granddaughter. The pieces clicked into place for everyone watching. Why I worked every position in the hospital, from janitor to nurse. Why I cared so much about every patient. I wasn't just learning the jobs, I was learning my grandfather's legacy from the ground up. The paperwork was finalized last week, I explained, accessing the hospital's main system with my true credentials. Which means your dead man's switch? It's trying to access a system you no longer control. On the monitors, we could see the emergency protocols reversing, doors unlocking, medication systems returning to normal operation. But your father, Dr. Harrison sputtered. Richard Chen died before he could. Before he could what? I asked. Change his will? Name you a successor? I pulled up documents on the nearest screen. Actually, he did something far more important that night. He recorded everything. Security footage began playing, 15 years old but crystal clear. It showed a younger Dr. Harrison in my grandfather's office, demanding control of the hospital. Healthcare is a business, she screamed in the footage, not your personal charity. Healthcare is a right, my grandfather's voice replied calmly. And this hospital will never prioritize profits over patients, not while a Chen is alive to prevent it. The footage showed what happened next. Dr. Harrison's rage, the poison she slipped into his drink, not realizing he'd already swapped the glasses. He survived, Mr. Chen explained. Barely, but he knew the hospital wasn't safe while she remained in power. So he went into hiding, protecting his legacy until the right moment. And that moment, I stepped closer to Dr. Harrison. Was finding someone who could rebuild Metropolitan General from the inside out. Someone who understood every job, every patient, every detail of what makes a hospital work. The FBI agents moved in to arrest her, but Dr. Harrison had one final card to play. She pulled out another phone, a dead man's switch for something far worse. One press, she threatened, and every media outlet gets proof of patient neglect under Chen family management. Your reputation will be destroyed. I almost laughed. You mean the carefully documented cases of neglect you orchestrated? The ones we've been tracking and correcting for months? Check your phone's signal. She pressed the button repeatedly, growing more frantic. Nothing happened. Hospital rooms have excellent signal blocking, I explained, especially when you know which frequencies to target. As they led her away in handcuffs, the morning shift arrived to find their hospital transformed. The homeless patient was now revealed as the long-lost Thomas Chen. The fired nurse was their new CEO. And most importantly, the hospital was returning to its original mission. 1 year later, Metropolitan General leads the country in patient care quality. I still work nursing shifts regularly, now with my real name badge. My father handles the business side while I focus on medicine, continuing my grandfather's legacy of putting patients first. Dr. Harrison serves her sentence in a minimum security prison, where she's required to provide basic medical care to fellow inmates. Sometimes the best karma is being forced to give the very thing you tried to deny others. The notebook that captured everything. It sits in my office, a reminder that the most important medical tool isn't technology or money. It's the willingness to care for every patient, regardless of their appearance or ability to pay. After all, you never know when the homeless person in your emergency room might turn out to be someone extraordinary, or more importantly, when an ordinary person might need extraordinary care. I never thought my sister's wedding would be the day everything changed. Looking back, I should have known something was wrong when my invitation arrived 3 days before the ceremony. Kitchen staff entrance only, it read in elegant gold script with a crude arrow drawn pointing to the back of the venue. My sister Victoria had always been the golden child. While I chose to work with underprivileged children as a teacher, she climbed the corporate ladder with perfectly manicured nails and designer heels. Our parents never let me forget the difference between us. Why can't you be more like your sister? Mom would say, shaking her head at my simple clothes and practical shoes. Look at her, engaged to James Anderson, CEO of Anderson Industries. And what do you have to show for yourself? What they didn't know was that I had plenty to show, just not in ways they could understand. My small apartment might not be impressive, but the smiles of my students when they finally grasp a difficult concept, those are worth more than any luxury condo. Still, I went to the wedding. Victoria was my sister, after all, even as she'd grown more distant since getting engaged to James. I put on my best dress, not designer, but elegant in its simplicity, and drove my old Honda Civic to the Grand Plaza Hotel. The security guard at the main entrance took one look at my invitation and pointed to the back. Service entrance only, he said gruffly. I found myself walking through the hotel's kitchen, dodging busy staff preparing for what was clearly going to be an extravagant reception. A hostess led me to a small table tucked behind a large pillar, practically hidden from the main celebration. Victoria's instructions were very clear, she said apologetically. Family members who might embarrass the couple should be kept out of sight. My hands trembled as I sat down. The table was set with plastic utensils, while I could see fine china gleaming on the other tables. A handwritten note in my sister's flowing script sat next to the plastic fork. "Know your place, little sister. Don't ruin this for me." I should have left then. Should have walked out and never looked back. But something made me stay. Perhaps the same stubborn determination that made me choose teaching over the corporate career my parents demanded. The ceremony was beautiful, of course. I watched from my hidden corner as Victoria floated down the aisle in a gown that probably cost more than my yearly salary. James Anderson waited at the altar, tall and distinguished in his custom tuxedo. He was handsome in that polished way that Grace magazine covers, but something about his expression seemed strained. Then he saw me. In that moment, as his eyes met mine across the crowded room, James Anderson, CEO of Anderson Industries, did something completely unexpected. He dropped his wedding ring. The small golden band made a distinct ping as it hit the marble floor and rolled, coming to rest right at my feet. As I bent to pick it up, memories from 15 years ago came flooding back. I was 19, working my way through college at a small coffee shop in Boston. He was 22, a regular customer who always ordered the same thing: black coffee, no sugar. Back then, he wasn't James Anderson, CEO. He was just Jamie, a graduate student with dreams of changing the world through ethical business practices. We'd spent 6 beautiful months together, sharing dreams and plans for the future. He wanted to revolutionize corporate responsibility. I wanted to teach. We talked about combining our passions somehow, maybe starting a foundation for education. Then he disappeared. No explanation, no goodbye. Just vanished from my life completely. I tried to find him, but it was like he never existed. A year later, I saw his photo in a business magazine. James Anderson, heir to Anderson Industries, engaged to a wealthy socialite. My heart broke all over again. Now here he was, staring at me like he'd seen a ghost, while my sister, his bride, watched in confusion. "Jamie," I whispered, holding out his wedding ring. The color drained from his face. Victoria's perfectly plucked eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "James, darling, do you know my pathetic little sister?" But James wasn't looking at his bride anymore. His eyes were fixed on my left hand, where I still wore the small silver ring he'd given me 15 years ago at that coffee shop in Boston. The one with the inscription, "To my Emma who taught me what really matters." "Emma," he breathed, and in that one word, I heard 15 years of regret. Victoria's voice turned sharp. "James, what's going on?" Before he could answer, a distinguished older man rose from the front row. Richard Anderson Sr., James's father and founder of Anderson Industries. His face was thunderous as he approached the altar. "Son," his voice carried across the suddenly silent room. "Please tell me this isn't the same Emma." The same Emma. The words hung in the air like storm clouds. What did he mean, the same Emma? James straightened his spine, and for a moment, I saw the Jamie I used to know, the one who wanted to change the world. "Yes, father," he said clearly. "This is Emma Chen, the woman you paid $5 million to disappear 15 years ago." The room erupted in chaos. Victoria's perfect wedding dissolved into chaos. Guests began whispering, phones recording everything. My sister's face had turned an interesting shade of red that clashed horribly with her white dress. $5 million? I stood up slowly, my teacher's salary suddenly feeling very different. "You paid me to disappear?" Richard Anderson Sr. straightened his expensive tie. "I paid your mother. She assured me you'd never contact James again. Said you agreed it was for the best." My mother. Of course. The pieces started falling into place. Mom's sudden insistence that I transfer universities that year, the mysterious deposit in my college fund, her constant reminders that James, was out of my league. "You knew?" I turned to my mother, who was trying to disappear into her seat. "You took money to separate us?" "It was for your own good." Mom stood, her designer dress rustling. "Look at you, a teacher living in a tiny apartment. James needed someone who could understand his world. Victoria was perfect for him." "Perfect." James laughed bitterly. "Perfect for the company image, you mean? Just like that socialite you tried to set me up with after Emma left. Did you tell Victoria about that too, father? How you've been orchestrating my relationships for 15 years?" Victoria finally found her voice. James, darling, surely you're not comparing my worthless sister to me. I mean, look at her dress, it's not even designer. No, James said quietly, it's handmade. Emma always said the most valuable things are made with love, not money. He turned to me. You still make your own clothes. I nodded, throat tight. He remembered. This is ridiculous. Richard Anderson Sr. boomed. Son, you have responsibilities. The merger with Victoria's father's company. The merger? James's voice turned cold. Is that what this wedding is really about, father? Another business deal? Victoria went pale. What do you mean, a business deal? Oh, didn't you know? James turned to her. Your father's company is failing. This marriage would save it. That's why he pushed so hard for you to date me, isn't it? Victoria's father jumped up. Now see here. But James wasn't finished. He reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a USB drive. I found some interesting documents last week, father, about what really happened 15 years ago, about the real reason you wanted Emma gone. Richard Anderson Sr.'s face turned ashen. James. Emma wasn't just my girlfriend back then, James continued, his voice carrying across the silent room. She was also volunteering at a youth center in South Boston, a youth center that was about to be demolished for one of our developments, a development that would have displaced hundreds of families. I remembered that fight. The community had been organizing protests, and I'd been helping them. James had been supportive, even talked about finding alternative locations for the development. Emma was organizing the community, James went on. She was good at it too, really good. The media was starting to pay attention. If that development had failed, it would have cost the company millions. But more importantly, it would have shown that Anderson Industries could be beaten. That's why she had to go, isn't it, father? Richard Anderson Sr. collapsed into his chair. So you paid her mother to make her disappear. James's voice was ice. You destroyed evidence of our relationship. You even donated to her new university to ensure she'd be accepted for a transfer. Also perfectly arranged. I did what was necessary for the company, his father muttered. The company? James laughed. The company that's now mine? He turned to the shocked guests. Oh yes, as of last week, I'm the majority shareholder. Father signed over control as an early wedding gift. Ironic, isn't it? He walked over to me, ignoring Victoria's squeak of protest. Emma, he said softly, I spent 15 years thinking you'd abandoned me. 15 years trying to be the son my father wanted. Then last week, I found these documents and I finally understood. I was going to stop the wedding. But then I saw your name on the guest list. Seated in the kitchen, I added dryly. Of course, he smiled. Victoria always did have a flair for drama. He turned to my sister. The wedding's off, by the way. You might want to check your father's company's financials before he tries to arrange another merger. Victoria screamed, throwing her bouquet at us. It hit a champagne pyramid instead, sending crystal glasses crashing to the floor. As my first act as CEO, James announced over the chaos. Anderson Industries is establishing a $100 million foundation for educational initiatives in underserved communities. He looked at me. We need a director who understands both education and community organizing. Interested? My mother jumped up. Emma, darling, I always knew you had potential. Save it? I cut her off. I think you've done enough helping for one lifetime. I turned to James. The foundation job, does it come with a corner office? He grinned. Only if you'll have dinner with me first. I know this little coffee shop in Boston. You can't do this, Victoria shrieked. Daddy, do something. But her father was already rushing out, phone in hand, probably calling his accountant. Richard Anderson Sr. stood up shakily. Son, think about what you're doing. Oh, I have, father. For 15 years. James took my hand. The company's image could use some updating, don't you think? Less corporate greed, more social responsibility. Emma always said the measure of success isn't how much money you make, but how many lives you improve. My sister launched into another screaming fit, but I barely heard her. I was looking at the small silver ring I'd never taken off, remembering a young man in a coffee shop who wanted to change the world. You kept it, James said softly, touching the ring. You came back, I replied. 6 months later, the Anderson Chen Educational Foundation had already funded 50 community programs. Victoria eventually married a minor European prince who, ironically, believed in socialist policies. My parents suddenly became very interested in charitable giving, though their invitations to family events mysteriously get lost in the mail. Richard Anderson Sr. retired to a villa in Italy, though he did send a surprisingly heartfelt letter of apology. I framed it next to the newspaper article about our foundation's launch. As for me and James, we still go to that coffee shop in Boston. He still orders black coffee, no sugar. But now when we talk about changing the world, we actually do it. The small silver ring finally has a companion, a simple gold band that matches it perfectly. The inscription, "To my James, who came back to what really matters." Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting it right. Hi, I'm Emily Parker, and this is the story of how my perfect sister's dream wedding turned into a nightmare. Not because I wanted revenge, but because sometimes the truth refuses to stay buried. I was adopted by the Parkers when I was 6 months old. My parents, especially my dad, James Parker, always made sure I never felt different from my biological sister Kate, who was born 2 years after they adopted me. At least that's what I thought for 28 years. Dad's company, Parker Innovation Labs, was his pride and joy, a small research and development firm that created custom solutions for manufacturing companies. I grew up watching him pour his heart into it, spending late nights in his home office reviewing projects and proposals. While Kate excelled in dance recitals and beauty pageants, I inherited Dad's passion for innovation. I spent my summers interning at the company, learning every aspect of the business. After getting my engineering degree, I joined full-time as a project manager. That was 8 years ago. Since then, I'd worked my way up to Chief Innovation Officer, helping transform our small family business into an industry leader worth over $100 million. Kate, meanwhile, had become a successful social media influencer, posting about luxury lifestyle and relationship advice. The problem started when Kate got engaged to Thomas Bradford aita, heir to Bradford Technologies, one of our biggest competitors. "This merger of families will be perfect for business," Mom gushed during Kate's engagement party at our family estate. The champagne was flowing, and everyone who was anyone in the tech industry had been invited. I should have seen the signs earlier, the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, the strange looks from board members, the way Dad had been avoiding one-on-one meetings with me for weeks. Kate clanked her crystal champagne flute, gathering everyone's attention. She stood on the mansion's grand staircase, her designer dress sparkling under the chandelier lights. Thomas stood beside her, looking every bit the proud future CEO he was being groomed to be. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate our engagement," Kate beamed. "But there's something else we need to address tonight." My stomach dropped as her eyes found me in the crowd. "Emily, dear sister," her voice dripped with false concern. "We need to talk about the money." The room fell silent. I clutched my glass tighter. "What money?" "The $2 million that's missing from the company accounts." She paused for dramatic effect. "The money you've been embezzling for the past year." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Whispers erupted around the room. I looked to Dad for support, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "What are you talking about?" I managed to say. "I would never." "We have proof," Thomas interrupted, pulling out a folder. Financial records showing systematic theft through a series of cleverly hidden transactions, all traced back to your personal accounts. I felt the room spinning. "Dad, you know I would never steal from the company. Everything I've done has been for." "Save it," Kate snapped. "You're just the adopted one, trying to steal what rightfully belongs to the real Parker family. It's time to pay it all back." The silence that followed her words was deafening. I waited for Dad to defend me, to say something, anything. Instead, he slowly nodded. "The evidence is quite clear, Emily," he said quietly. "I think it would be best if you resigned immediately. We won't press charges if you return the money." In that moment, everything I thought I knew about my family shattered. 28 years of love and belonging crumbled under the weight of one accusation. I set my glass down carefully on a nearby table. "You want me to resign? Fine, I quit. But you should check those financial records more carefully before you make accusations." I walked out of the party with my head held high, ignoring the whispers and stares. As I reached my car, I heard Kate's voice ring out from the doorway. "Don't forget to return your company laptop and phone. We wouldn't want you deleting any evidence." I smiled despite the tears threatening to fall. My sister had always been so focused on appearances that she never bothered to learn how the company actually worked. She had no idea that for the past 3 years, I'd been documenting everything. That night, as I sat in my home office, I began implementing the contingency plan I created but hoped never to use. Years of watching other family businesses implode had taught me to always be prepared for betrayal. I pulled out my personal laptop and accessed a secure server that Kate and Thomas didn't know existed. Every email, every transaction, every piece of evidence showing who had really been stealing from the company. It was all there, waiting to be revealed. Kate's wedding was in a week. She planned an extravagant ceremony at the city's most exclusive venue, with over 500 guests, including every major player in the tech industry. She'd spent months ensuring it would be the social event of the year. Little did she know, I had my own plans for her special day. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying someone's future. It's about revealing the truth about their past. As I prepared for bed that night, my phone buzzed with a text from Kate. "Don't even think about coming to the wedding. Security has your photo." I replied with a simple smiley face emoji. She had no idea that I didn't need an invitation to crash her perfect day. After all, I designed the venue's security system myself. The next 7 days would change everything. But first, I had some calls to make. The morning of Kate's wedding dawned bright and clear. While she was probably getting her hair and makeup done at the Peninsula Hotel's presidential suite, I was in my home office making final preparations. The last week had been busy. I'd reached out to key industry contacts, set up meetings with the SEC, and gathered irrefutable evidence of what had really been happening at Parker Innovation Labs. But my most important call had been to someone Kate had completely forgotten about: our company's original programmer, old Joe. Joe had worked for Dad since the beginning, creating our core software systems. Kate and Thomas thought he retired 6 months ago. They didn't know he still maintained backdoor access to all company servers at my request. "Got everything?" I texted Joe at 9 a.m., all downloaded and verified, he replied. "They never changed the master passwords. Amateurs." I smiled, thinking of Kate's face when she realized her clever financial tricks weren't so clever after all. The money she accused me of stealing, every penny could be traced back to offshore accounts belonging to her fiance's family. At precisely 2 p.m., I parked my car 2 blocks from the St. Regis Hotel. The wedding was scheduled for 4 p.m. in the Grand Ballroom. Security was tight. Kate had made sure of that. But she'd forgotten one crucial detail. I'd installed the hotel's entire security infrastructure 3 years ago through Parker Innovation Labs. I walked through the service entrance, nodding to the kitchen staff who recognized me from the system installation. My fingerprints still worked on the biometric locks, another oversight. I made my way to the control room, where my old friend Marcus was working security. "Emily?" He looked surprised. "They said you were banned." I handed him a USB drive. "Marcus, remember when I saved your job last year after that breach? I need a favor." 20 minutes later, I was settled in the ballroom's upper control booth. Below, guests were arriving, the who's who of the tech industry, all dressed in their finest. Mom was greeting people, wearing an expensive new dress. Dad stood with Thomas's parents, probably discussing the merger they'd announced yesterday. The merger that would save Bradford Technologies from bankruptcy, using Parker Innovation Labs' money. My money. The money Kate accused me of stealing. At 3:55 p.m., Kate made her entrance for photos. She looked stunning in her designer gown, beaming as cameras flashed. Thomas waited at the altar, looking every bit the proud groom. I waited until the ceremony began, until the minister asked if anyone had any objections. That's when I activated Joe's program. The ballroom's lights dimmed. The massive screens meant for wedding photos came to life. And there, in high definition, began playing a presentation I titled "The Truth About the Parker Family Fortune." Financial records, emails, secret meetings, every corrupt dealing, every stolen dollar, every lie, displayed for all to see. Kate's face went from confusion to horror as she watched proof of her fiance's embezzlement scheme unfold on screen. "Turn it off," Thomas shouted, but the hotel's systems weren't responding to anyone but me. Then came the recording, a conversation between Kate and Thomas from 3 months ago. "Once we frame Emily for the missing money, Dad will have to give me control of the company." Kate's voice filled the ballroom. "The adopted brat never deserved it anyway. And once we merge the companies," Thomas replied, "we can sell off Parker's assets to cover Bradford's debts. Your father will never know what hit him. The screens switched to security footage of them doctoring financial records in Thomas's office, carefully cracking the trail that would lead to me. The ballroom erupted in chaos. I emerged from the control booth, walking calmly down the main aisle. Kate stood frozen in her white dress, mascara running down her cheeks. "Security," she screamed when she saw me. "They work for me," I said quietly, or rather, they work for Parker Innovation Lab's security division, which I built from the ground up. Dad stepped forward, his face ashen. "Emily, Save it," I cut him off. "Check your email. You'll find copies of everything you just saw, plus documentation of every innovation and client relationship I brought to the company. My resignation terms are attached. You have 1 hour to accept them." "You're bluffing," Thomas snarled. "You've got nothing." I smiled. "The SEC disagrees. They're very interested in Bradford Technologies' creative accounting, as are your shareholders." I nodded towards several pale-faced board members in the crowd. "Oh, and Kate, you were right about one thing. I'm not a real Parker. I'm better. I built that company into what it is today, while you were busy taking selfies and plotting theft." Mom tried to approach me, but I held up my hand. "My terms are simple. I take 51% ownership of Parker Innovation Labs, effective immediately. Kate and Thomas are banned from any involvement in the company. And Dad, you can keep your position as figurehead CEO, but your voting rights go to me. And if we refuse—" Kate's voice shook. "Then I release everything to the media. Parker Innovation Labs might survive the scandal. Bradford Technologies won't." I turned to the shocked guests. "I suggest you all go home. I don't think there's going to be a wedding today." The next few hours were a blur of lawyers, documents, and tears. By midnight, I owned controlling interest in the company I'd helped build. Bradford Technologies stock was in freefall, and Kate's perfect wedding had become the scandal of the year. 1 week later, I sat in my new office, formerly Dad's, reviewing acquisition proposals for what remained of Bradford Technologies. A knock at the door interrupted my work. It was Dad, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "I should have believed in you," he said quietly. "Yes, you should have. Can we ever fix this?" I thought about it. Maybe. Not as father and daughter, you lost that right at the engagement party. But as business partners, we'll see. You taught me my first lesson about innovation. Sometimes you have to tear something down completely before you can build it back better. He nodded sadly and left. I turned back to my window, looking out at the city skyline. My phone buzzed. A text from Kate. "I'm sorry. I was wrong about everything." I didn't reply. Some apologies come too late. They say success is the best revenge, but I disagree. The best revenge is forcing people to face their own lies. Kate wanted a wedding that everyone would remember. Well, she got her wish, just not in the way she planned. As for me, I'm still the same person who loves innovation and building things. The only difference is now everyone knows what I'm capable of, and no one will ever call me just the adopted one again.